The ledger in Evelyn Mercer's trembling hands told an impossible story. Her new husband owed money on debts already paid years ago. Outside, winter wind screamed across Red Hollow's frozen valley, while inside, the most dangerous man in the territory smiled at her like a wolf sizing up prey. Victor Hale had crushed a dozen families with these same fake numbers. Nobody had ever challenged him and survived. But Evelyn wasn't nobody. She'd spent her whole life learning how powerful men cheat the desperate. And tonight, she was about to bet everything that she could read faster than Hale could lie. Before we begin this story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. Now, let's dive in. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of a building that barely deserved the word station. Evelyn Mercer stepped down into ankle-deep mud, her worn boots sinking immediately into the cold muck of Red Hollow's excuse for a main street. November 1881 had arrived early in Montana Territory, bringing with it the kind of bone-deep cold that made even breathing feel like work. She was 26 years old, alone, and about to marry a man she'd never met. "This is it?" Evelyn asked the driver, who was already hauling down her leather trunk, the only possession she owned that mattered. "Red Hollow." He spit tobacco juice into the mud. "Your husband-to-be supposed to meet you here?" "That's what the letter said." The driver gave her a look that mixed pity with something close to respect. Women who answered marriage bureau advertisements weren't rare on the frontier, but most of them at least pretended they were excited about it. This one just looked tired and calculating, like she was doing math in her head about whether she'd made a terrible mistake. "Good luck, ma'am." He climbed back up without another word. The stagecoach pulled away, leaving Evelyn standing alone in front of a general store, a saloon, and what might have been a church or might have been someone's barn. Hard to tell. 3 men loitered outside the saloon, watching her with the blank curiosity of people who had nothing better to do. A woman in a faded dress swept the porch of the general store, paused to stare, then went back to sweeping. Evelyn picked up her trunk. It wasn't heavy. Everything she owned fit inside with room to spare. 6 dresses, 4 of them patched. Undergarments, 1 pair of good gloves, a few books. And at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, the only photograph she had of her parents before the bank took their house. She'd learned early that sentiment was expensive. Survival was cheaper when you traveled light. "Miss Mercer?" The voice came from behind her. Evelyn turned and saw a man approaching on horseback, tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-30s. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile but might remember if given enough time. Caleb Grayson. Had to be. "Mr. Grayson." She didn't curtsy, didn't blush, didn't do any of the things the Marriage Bureau handbook said women should do when meeting their intended. She just stood there, holding her trunk, meeting his eyes. He dismounted. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Not the exhaustion of a drunk or a lazy man, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for too long. "I appreciate you coming all this way." His voice was rough, unpracticed at conversation. "I know the advertisement wasn't detailed. It said you needed a wife. I needed a husband. Seemed straightforward enough. A flicker of something, amusement, relief, crossed his face. "You always this direct?" "Saves time." Evelyn shifted her grip on the trunk. "I assume we're not getting married standing in the mud." "No, ma'am. There's a minister about 3 miles north. I thought we could head to the ranch first, let you get settled, and—" "Why wait?" Caleb blinked. "I'm sorry? I came here to get married. You put an advertisement in the paper because you need a wife. I don't see any point in delaying." Evelyn's voice was flat, practical. "Unless you've changed your mind." "I haven't changed my mind." "Then let's go find that minister." For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then he picked up her trunk, secured it to his horse, and helped her climb up behind him. His hands were rough with calluses, but surprisingly gentle. They rode in silence toward the minister's house. The Reverend Marcus Webb performed the ceremony in his front room, which smelled like old coffee and wet dog. His wife stood as witness, wearing an expression that suggested she'd seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. Desperate rancher, mail-order bride, quick vows before anyone could think too hard about what they were doing. Do you, Caleb Edward Grayson, take this woman? I do. And do you, Evelyn Louise Mercer? I do. Webb paused, clearly expecting more hesitation, more drama. When none came, he shrugged and finished the vows in record time. By the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I now pronounce you man and wife. Caleb didn't kiss her. Evelyn didn't expect him to. They signed the papers, paid the Reverend $2, and left. Married. Just like that. The ride to the ranch took another hour. The landscape opened up gradually, rolling hills giving way to wider valleys, pine forests thinning out to reveal grazing land that stretched toward distant mountains. Under different circumstances, Evelyn might have called it beautiful. Right now, she was too cold and too aware that she'd just legally tied herself to a complete stranger to appreciate scenery. "How long have you owned the ranch?" she asked, more to break the silence than because she cared. "My father built it. I inherited it 8 years ago." "And you've been running it alone?" "Mostly. Had a few hired hands, but—" He trailed off. "But what?" Caleb's shoulders tensed. "Money got tight. Had to let them go." Evelyn filed that away. "The advertisement said you raised cattle." "Used to. Now I've got about 40 head, down from nearly 300. "What happened to the rest?" "Sold them. Had to." She waited for more explanation. None came. That was fine. She'd learned to read silences better than most people read words. When the ranch finally came into view, Evelyn felt her stomach drop. It wasn't falling apart. That's what surprised her. She'd expected broken fences, collapsed barns, the obvious signs of a man losing his grip on everything. Instead, she saw sturdy buildings, well-maintained corrals, and healthy-looking cattle grazing in the near pasture. The ranch house itself was solid timber construction, 2 stories, with a stone chimney and glass windows that reflected the afternoon sun. This wasn't a failing ranch. This was a working operation that should have been thriving. "You built all this?" Evelyn asked carefully. "My father started it. I've just been trying to keep it going." Caleb dismounted and helped her down. "I know it's not much. It's more than I expected." He looked at her sharply, trying to figure out if that was an insult or a compliment. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. She'd learned early that showing too much emotion gave people weapons they'd use later. Inside, the house was clean but empty in the way places get when nobody really lives in them anymore. The furniture was good quality but worn. The kitchen had proper appliances, a real stove, a pump sink, cabinets built into the wall. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, all of them furnished but collecting dust. "You can take the main bedroom," Caleb said, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. "I'll move my things to the smaller room." Evelyn set down her trunk. "That's not necessary. I don't want you to think—" He stopped, started again. "The advertisement was for a wife, a partner, not— I'm not expecting—" "I understand." And she did. This was a business arrangement. She could work with that. But if we're going to make this convincing to whoever matters around here, separate bedrooms will raise questions. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't give a damn what people think. Maybe you should." Evelyn walked to the window, looking out over the ranch. "A man who owns all this doesn't advertise for a mail-order bride unless something's very wrong. So either you're broken in some way I haven't spotted yet, or someone's putting pressure on you that a wife is supposed to fix. Which is it?" The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "Both, probably." Evelyn turned to face him. "I'm not here to fix you, Mr. Grayson. I'm here because I needed to leave Boston and you needed a wife. But if you want this arrangement to work, you're going to have to tell me what I'm walking into." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Like he'd expected a frightened girl and was recalibrating now that he'd gotten something else entirely. "There's coffee downstairs," he said finally. "This is going to take a while." They sat at the kitchen table while Caleb told her the story in fits and starts, the way men do when they're not used to explaining themselves. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold. It started simply enough. 8 years ago, Caleb's father died suddenly, leaving him a ranch that was profitable but heavily mortgaged. Normal frontier business. Land was expensive, credit was necessary, and most ranchers carried debt. The plan was to pay it off over time through cattle sales. Then Victor Hale arrived. Hale called himself an investor. He bought up failing ranches, restructured debt, provided capital for expansion. On paper, he was exactly what struggling operations needed. In practice, he was something else entirely. He came to me about 6 years ago, Caleb said, staring at his own coffee. Offered to consolidate my debts, give me better terms. I was drowning in payments to 3 different banks. It seemed like salvation. But it wasn't. No. His hands tightened around the cup. First year was fine. Made my payments, even had a little left over. Second year, the numbers stopped making sense. I'd pay what I owed, but the balance never went down. Sometimes it went up. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew this pattern, had watched it destroy her own father. What did the bank say? Hale owns the bank, or the bank works for him. Hard to tell the difference. Caleb's voice went flat, defeated. I brought in an accountant from Helena. Man spent 3 days going through the records and said everything looked legal. Said I must have misunderstood the terms. Did you? No. He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw anger there instead of exhaustion. I'm not stupid, and I'm not crazy. The numbers don't add up. But every time I challenge Hale, he shows me contracts I don't remember signing and payment schedules that somehow changed from what we agreed on. And the lawyer? Said fighting it would cost more than I have. Said men like Hale have too many connections, too much power. Caleb's laugh was bitter. Suggested I might want to consider selling while I still had something to sell. Evelyn set down her coffee cup with careful precision. How many other ranchers are in the same situation? Most of them. Maybe all of them. He gestured vaguely toward the valley beyond the window. Red Hollow used to have 12 working ranches. Now there's 4, and we're all barely hanging on. The rest sold out to Hale, or just walked away. And the ones who are left? Scared, tired. We compare notes sometimes, but... He shrugged. What good does it do? Hale's got lawyers, bankers, territory officials in his pocket. We're just ranchers. Evelyn stood and walked to the window, her mind already working through the pieces. This wasn't complicated fraud. Those took sophisticated systems and multiple conspirators. This was brute force theft, the kind that relied on victims being too isolated and too exhausted to fight back. I want to see the contracts, she said. Caleb looked up, surprised. What? The contracts, the payment records, everything Hale gave you. She turned to face him. Where do you keep them? In the office upstairs, but I told you I already had an accountant. I'm not an accountant. Then what are you? Evelyn considered several answers and settled on the truth. I'm the daughter of a man who got destroyed exactly like this, except he didn't survive it. She watched Caleb's face carefully. I spent 5 years after he died working for the bank that took our house, filing papers, organizing records, learning exactly how these things work. So yes, I want to see the contracts. For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Upstairs, he said. Follow me. The office was a small room that overlooked the front pasture. 1 desk, 1 filing cabinet, 1 window. Caleb pulled out a worn ledger and a stack of papers held together with string. This is everything, he said, setting them on the desk. The original mortgage from my father's time, the consolidation agreement with Hale, payment receipts for the last 6 years. Evelyn sat down and opened the ledger. Numbers swam across the page. Dates, amounts, interest calculations. At first glance, it all looked professional and legitimate. That's how these things always looked. She started at the beginning. The original mortgage was straightforward. Caleb's father had borrowed $12,000 at 8% interest to be repaid over 15 years. Standard terms. Nothing unusual. The consolidation agreement with Hale was where things got interesting. Evelyn read it twice, then a third time, her finger tracing the lines of dense legal language. The terms seemed reasonable on the surface. Hale would take over all existing debts, provide an additional line of credit for operational expenses, and restructure the payments to give Caleb more breathing room. But buried in the middle of page 3 was a clause that made her stop cold. What is it? Caleb asked, watching her face. This section here. She pointed to a paragraph dense with legal terminology. It says that any operational expenses drawn against the line of credit will be calculated as separate loans with compounding interest, and that payments made will be applied first to interest on those operational loans, then to interest on the primary debt, and only then to principal. Caleb frowned. Is that unusual? It's not unusual. It's brilliant. Evelyn felt a grudging admiration for whoever had structured this. It means that every time you use that line of credit for feed, supplies, emergency expenses, you were creating new debt that multiplied faster than you could pay it off. And because payments go to interest first, you'd never touch the principal. So He stopped, the realization hitting him. I've been paying him for 6 years and the debt hasn't moved at all. Worse than that. Evelyn pulled out the payment receipts and started cross-referencing them against the ledger. If I'm reading this right, the debt has actually increased. You started at $12,000 with the original mortgage. According to this, you now owe, she did quick calculations in her head, nearly $23,000. The color drained from Caleb's face. That's impossible. I've paid him almost $9,000 over 6 years, all of which went to interest and fees. Evelyn kept reading, her anger building with each page. And these operational loans, did you actually request all of these? Caleb came around the desk to look. Some of them, but this one for winter feed in '79. I didn't need to borrow for that. I sold cattle specifically to cover winter supplies. Do you have records of the sale? Somewhere. He started pulling papers from the filing cabinet. I keep everything, even though I'm not sure why anymore. Because men like Hale count on people giving up. Evelyn kept her voice steady, clinical. Getting emotional wouldn't help. They bury you in paperwork and contradictions until you're too exhausted to remember what's real. That's when they win. Caleb found the cattle sale receipt and handed it to her. Evelyn compared it to the operational loan entry in the ledger. The dates were 2 weeks apart. Caleb had sold cattle, received payment, and deposited it with Hale's bank. 2 weeks later, the same amount appeared as a new loan against his operational credit. He took your money and loaned it back to you, Evelyn said quietly, then charged you interest on your own funds. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Caleb's voice when he finally spoke was rough with fury. Can we prove that? If we can find more examples, yes. Evelyn was already pulling out more receipts. But proof won't matter if there's nowhere to take it. You said Hale has connections throughout the territory. So what do we do? Evelyn looked up at him, this stranger she'd married 4 hours ago, and made a decision that would change everything. We find every other rancher he's done this to, she said. We gather their records, their contracts, their receipts. We document every single instance of fraud across every operation he's touched. And then we build a case so overwhelming that even his connections can't bury it. Caleb stared at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. That could take months, and he could seize this place any day. All he needs is one missed payment. When's your next payment due? End of January. Then we have 2 months. Evelyn stood, her mind already organizing the work ahead. I'll need to talk to the other ranchers, get copies of their contracts. You'll need to help me understand the local relationships, who we can trust, who might be working with Hale. Evelyn, Caleb caught her arm gently. You don't have to do this. You just got here. You don't owe me. I don't do things because I owe people, Mr. Grayson. She met his eyes steadily. I do them because I'm good at them, and because men like Victor Hale took everything from my family once before. I won't let it happen again. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Caleb, he said, if we're going to fight a war together, you should probably call me Caleb. Fine, Caleb. Evelyn turned back to the papers on the desk. Now tell me about the other ranchers, starting with the ones who might actually help. They worked through the night. Caleb made lists while Evelyn organized documents, creating a system that would let them track patterns across multiple operations. He told her about the neighboring ranches, the Hendersons, who'd lost their place 2 years ago, the McAllister family, who were down to their last 50 acres, Thomas Bridger, who'd started talking about just walking away and heading to California. What about the ones who already sold to Hale? Evelyn asked, making notes. Most of them left the valley. But Jim Richardson's still around, works at the general store now. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had the biggest operation after mine. 300 head of cattle, prime grazing land, Hale took it all in less than 3 years. Would he talk to us? I don't know. Caleb searched for the word. Broken. Doesn't like talking about what happened. We need to try. Evelyn added Richardson's name to the list. Even if he just confirms the pattern, it helps. Around midnight, Caleb finally insisted they stop. Evelyn's eyes were burning from reading by lamplight, and her hand cramped from taking notes, but her mind was still racing through possibilities and connections. You need to sleep, Caleb said, gently taking the pen from her hand. This'll still be here tomorrow. Will it? Evelyn looked at the papers spread across the desk. What happens when Hale finds out I'm going through these records? How would he find out? Men like him always find out. They have people watching, listening. She met his eyes. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to be realistic about what we're up against. Caleb was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that fear was just information. It tells you something's dangerous, but it doesn't tell you to run. It tells you to be careful. Smart man. He was, until Hale got to him too. Caleb's voice went flat. The original mortgage, the one that started all this? My father took it out to pay off an earlier debt. To Hale. I didn't know that until after he died. Evelyn absorbed this new information, fitting it into the larger picture. How long had Hale been working this valley? At least 15 years? Maybe longer. Then we're not just documenting fraud. We're documenting a system. She stood, stretching muscles that had gone stiff from sitting. That's good, actually. Systems have patterns. Patterns can be proven. Caleb watched her pace the small office, something like amazement in his expression. You really think we can beat him? I think we can try. Evelyn stopped at the window, looking out at the dark valley. I think that's more than anyone else has done. And I think if we're smart and careful and refuse to give up, we might have a chance. And if we fail, then we fail together. She turned to face him, which is still better than failing alone. The first week passed in a blur of paperwork and careful conversations. Evelyn studied every document Caleb had, memorizing numbers and dates until she could recite them in her sleep. She learned the landscape of Red Hollow, which families had sold out, which were still fighting, which had simply vanished into bankruptcy and despair. Caleb took her to meet Thomas Bridger first. The man ran sheep on rocky land north of the Grayson Ranch, barely scraping by after Hale's restructuring had nearly destroyed him 3 years earlier. Bridger was in his 50s, weathered and suspicious. He stood in his doorway looking at Evelyn like she was something that might bite him. This is my wife, Caleb said simply. She's helping me understand some financial irregularities. Financial irregularities. Bridger's laugh was harsh. That's a fancy way of saying Hale's robbing us blind. Yes, Evelyn said. It is. Bridger blinked, surprised by her directness. You're the mail-order bride everyone's talking about. I'm Caleb's wife, and I'm someone who knows how fraud works. Evelyn didn't smile, didn't soften her tone. I need to see your contracts with Victor Hale. All of them. What for? Because if the pattern I'm seeing in Caleb's record shows up in yours, we might be able to prove systematic fraud. And if we can prove that, we might be able to break Hale's control over this valley. Bridger stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into his house. He came back with a wooden box full of papers. Everything's in here, he said, handing it to Caleb. Contracts, receipts, letters from Hale's lawyers. All of it. His voice cracked slightly. I stopped looking at it 2 years ago. Couldn't stand seeing those numbers anymore. Evelyn took the box. I'll need a few days to go through this. I'll bring it back with notes about what I find. You really think you can do something? She met his eyes steadily. I think doing nothing guarantees Hale wins. So yes, I'm going to try. But the pattern was there. Evelyn saw it within the first hour of reviewing Bridger's papers. The same consolidation structure, the same buried clause about operational expenses, the same mysterious increases in debt despite regular payments, and most damningly, the same instances of Bridger's own money being redeposited as new loans. She documented everything, cross-referencing dates and amounts, building a parallel timeline that showed how Hale had systematically drained Bridger's operation over 4 years. When she brought the box back to Bridger 3 days later, she had 15 pages of notes. You were paying off debt you'd already paid. she told him, spreading the documents on his kitchen table. Here, here, and here. 3 separate instances where Hale took your money, held it for 2 weeks, then loaned it back to you at interest. Bridger's hands shook as he looked at the papers. I knew something was wrong, but everyone said I was just bad at business, that I didn't understand finance. You understood fine. Evelyn's voice was firm. Hale was counting on you thinking it was your fault. That's how this works. Make the victim blame themselves. What do I do now? Nothing yet. Evelyn gathered up the papers. I need to see how widespread this is, but I'll need you to testify about what happened when the time comes. Can you do that? Bridger looked at Caleb. You trust her? With my life, Caleb said without hesitation. Then yes. Bridger straightened his shoulders slightly, some old pride returning. I'll testify, and I'll help however I can. Word spread slowly, carefully. Caleb and Evelyn visited 3 more ranches over the next 2 weeks. The McAllister family, the Porters, who were down to subsistence farming after losing their cattle herd, an old widow named Sarah Chen, whose husband had died of a heart attack 6 months after Hale seized their best grazing land. Each family had the same story. Each set of records showed the same pattern. Evelyn documented everything, building a massive case file that spanned nearly a decade of systematic fraud. She worked 18-hour days, her eyes burning from reading by lamplight, her fingers cramped from writing endless notes. Caleb watched her work with something between admiration and concern. You need to rest, he said one night, finding her still at the desk at 2 a.m. I'm fine. You're exhausted. He put a hand on her shoulder. This can wait until morning. No, it can't. Evelyn didn't look up from the ledger. Every day we wait is another day Hale could move against one of these families. We're racing against time, and time's winning. Evelyn. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. You've been at this for 16 hours straight. You're not going to miss something crucial in the next 6 hours of sleep. She wanted to argue, but her eyes blurred on the numbers and she realized he was right. Fine, 6 hours. But when she stood up, the room tilted sideways. Caleb caught her before she fell, his arms steady and warm. When did you last eat? He asked. Evelyn tried to remember. Breakfast? That was yesterday. He guided her toward the kitchen. Sit, I'm making you food. She was too tired to protest. She sat at the kitchen table while Caleb heated soup and sliced bread, moving around the kitchen with the comfortable efficiency of a man used to taking care of himself. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Do what? Take care of me. That wasn't part of the arrangement. Caleb set a bowl of soup in front of her. The arrangement was for a wife, a partner. Partners take care of each other. Evelyn looked at the soup, then at him. I'm not used to people doing things for me. I noticed. He sat down across from her with his own bowl. You're not used to asking for help either. Asking for help is dangerous. People use it against you. Some people do. Caleb met her eyes. But not everyone. Not me. They ate in silence for a while. The soup was simple but warm, and Evelyn realized she was hungrier than she'd thought. My father used to make soup like this, she said finally, before things got bad. You don't talk about him much. Nothing good to say. Evelyn stared into her bowl. He was a good man who trusted the wrong people. It destroyed him. Hale? Someone like him. Different name, same methods. She looked up. That's why I can't let this go, Caleb. I watched my father break himself trying to figure out where he'd gone wrong, what mistake he'd made. He died thinking he'd failed us. I can't. Her voice caught. I can't let that happen to these families. Not when I know how to stop it. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. We'll stop it, he said quietly. Together. Mend it? By mid-December, Evelyn had documented fraud across 7 different ranching operations. The pattern was undeniable. Hale had been systematically bleeding the valley for over a decade, using legal language and financial complexity to hide what was essentially organized theft. But documentation was only the first step. The real challenge was finding someone in authority who would actually do something about it. The local sheriff won't help, Caleb said, reviewing Evelyn's list of potential allies. He's on Hale's payroll. What about the territorial government? Maybe, but I don't know who to approach. Hale has connections all the way to Helena. Evelyn tapped her pen against the desk, thinking, we need someone whose authority supersedes local corruption, someone with jurisdiction over financial fraud across territory lines. Federal marshals? Possibly. Or, she stopped, an idea forming. What about the Department of the Interior? They handle territory land grants and financial oversight for homestead operations. Caleb frowned. How do you know that? I read a lot when I worked at the bank. Evelyn was already making notes. If Hale's fraud involves land seizures that were originally granted under federal homestead laws, that brings it under federal jurisdiction, local connections won't matter as much. Caleb stared at her. That's brilliant. But how do we get a federal investigator out here without Hale finding out? We don't hide it. Evelyn looked up, her eyes sharp. We make it public. We gather all the evidence, organize all the testimony, and we send it directly to the Department of the Interior with copies to every newspaper between here and Washington. We make it so big and so public that Hale can't bury it. That's incredibly dangerous. Yes, Evelyn's voice was steady. It is. If we do this, Hale will know we're coming for him. He'll retaliate. He might try to seize this ranch immediately. He might threaten the other families into silence. He might come after you, Caleb interrupted. Personally. Their eyes met across the desk. Evelyn saw the fear there, and underneath it, something fiercer. Determination, maybe, or the beginnings of something that looked like partnership. He might, she agreed. But if we don't do this, he wins by default. Every family in this valley loses everything, including us. Caleb stood and walked to the window, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I never should have brought you into this. You could have had a quiet life. Maybe not easy, but safe. I didn't come here for safety. Evelyn joined him at the window. Outside, snow was beginning to fall across the valley. I came here because I was tired of running from things, tired of letting people like Hale win. You're not afraid? I'm terrified. She said it simply, honestly. But being afraid doesn't mean doing nothing. It means being careful about how you do something. Caleb turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something like hope showed in his expression. How did you get so brave? I'm not brave. I'm just angry enough to be useful. Evelyn managed a small smile. And I'm very, very good at being useful. The last week before Christmas, they made their move. Evelyn drafted a comprehensive report documenting every instance of fraud she'd found across 7 ranching operations. 43 pages of evidence, cross-referenced and indexed, showing a pattern of systematic theft spanning 12 years. Caleb gathered sworn statements from 5 ranching families, each one testifying to the same experience. Consolidation loans that never decreased, mysterious debt increases, personal funds redeposited as new obligations. Together, they prepared copies of everything. One for the Department of the Interior, one for the territorial governor, one for the major newspaper in Helena, and one held in reserve. Once we mail these, there's no going back, Caleb said, holding the sealed envelopes. I know. Evelyn had spent the last 3 nights barely sleeping, running through every possible consequence. But we've done everything we can to protect ourselves. The evidence is solid. The testimonies are credible. And we've documented everything carefully enough that even if something happens to us, the case can continue. If something happens to us, Caleb's jaw tightened. You mean if Hale kills us? I mean if Hale tries to make us disappear, yes. Evelyn met his eyes. We need to be realistic about what we're facing. Men who steal millions of dollars don't usually stop at legal threats. Caleb set down the envelopes and took both her hands. I need you to understand something. If this goes wrong, if Hale comes after us, then we face it together. Evelyn squeezed his hands. That's what partners do. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, and Evelyn realized something had shifted between them. This stranger she'd married 2 months ago had become someone she trusted with her life, someone she'd fight beside, someone she might even... She stopped that thought before it could finish. Sentiment was expensive. They had work to do. Let's mail these before I lose my nerve, she said. They rode to the post office in Red Hollow together. The clerk raised his eyebrows at the number of envelopes, but asked no questions. Money changed hands, The letters disappeared into mail sacks. It was done. On the ride back to the ranch, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they'd just set in motion hung heavy in the cold December air. That night, as snow fell across Red Hollow Valley, Evelyn stood at the bedroom window watching the world turn white. Behind her, Caleb slept in the chair he'd pulled next to the bed. His compromise between propriety and protection, staying close in case Hale's retaliation came quickly. She thought about the letter now, on its way to Helena, about the federal investigators who might or might not care about fraud in a remote Montana valley, about the 7 families counting on her to be smart enough, careful enough, brave enough, about the fact that for the first time in her life, she wasn't running away from something. She was running toward it. Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering the valley in white silence. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was continuing his empire of systematic theft, unaware that his perfect system was about to crack wide open. Evelyn pressed her hand against the cold window glass and made herself a promise. Whatever happened next, whatever price they had to pay, she would not let Hale win. Not this time. Not ever again. The first response arrived 3 weeks later, but not from the Department of the Interior. Evelyn was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the horse approach. Through the window, she saw a man she didn't recognize. Tall, dressed in a suit too fine for ranch country, riding a horse that cost more than most families earned in a year. Her hand stilled in the flour. Caleb was in the barn. She could scream, bring him running, but that would show weakness. And weakness was exactly what men like this fed on. She wiped her hands clean, straightened her apron, and walked to the door. By the time she opened it, the man had dismounted and was studying the ranch house with the calculating assessment of someone pricing property for auction. "Mrs. Grayson?" His voice was smooth, educated, East Coast accent, probably Boston or Philadelphia. "Who's asking?" "Marcus Webb. I represent Mr. Victor Hale's business interests in this territory." He smiled, showing perfect teeth. "I was hoping to speak with your husband about a financial matter." "My husband's occupied. You can speak with me." Webb's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I'm afraid this concerns contracts and debt obligations. Perhaps it would be better if I said you can speak with me." Evelyn didn't move from the doorway. "I handle the ranch finances." "I see." Webb pulled an envelope from his coat. "Then perhaps you can explain why Mr. Grayson has been distributing false allegations about Mr. Hale's business practices to various government agencies and newspapers." So that's how this would go, straight to intimidation. "False allegations would imply we made things up," Evelyn said calmly. "We documented fraud. There's a difference. Documented fraud." Webb's laugh was patronizing. "Mrs. Grayson, I understand you're new to frontier business, but making serious accusations against respected investors without understanding the full context. I understand the context perfectly." Evelyn cut him off. "Your employer has been systematically defrauding ranching families across this valley for over a decade. The pattern is consistent, the evidence is documented, and the testimonies are sworn. Context doesn't change theft." Webb's smile finally disappeared. "You're making a serious mistake." "Am I?" "Mr. Hale has been more than patient with your husband's financial difficulties, but patience has limits." He handed her the envelope. "This is a formal notice that the grace period on Mr. Grayson's consolidated loan has expired. Full payment of $23,000 is due by the end of January. Failure to pay will result in immediate foreclosure." Evelyn took the envelope but didn't open it. "The grace period was supposed to last another 14 months. Contract terms can change when borrowers engage in defamatory behavior." Webb's voice went silky with threat. "Mr. Hale is prepared to be reasonable, of course. If you and your husband withdraw your baseless accusations, apologize publicly, and sign statements confirming that all business dealings were conducted fairly, he's willing to restore the original terms." "And if we don't?" "Then you'll lose everything. The ranch, the cattle, the house, everything your husband's family built." Webb's eyes traveled over her deliberately, insultingly. "Though I'm sure a woman with your practicality could find another situation. There are always men looking for wives, even second-hand ones." The insult hung in the cold air between them. Evelyn met his eyes without flinching. "You can tell Mr. Hale that we won't be withdrawing anything. The evidence speaks for itself, and we'll see him in federal court." "Federal court?" Webb laughed. You think federal investigators care about some struggling ranchers in Montana? Mrs. Grayson, you have no idea how the world actually works. Maybe not, but I know how fraud works, and I know how to prove it. Webb's expression hardened. You have until the end of January. After that, this ranch belongs to Mr. Hale, and there's not a judge in this territory who'll side with you over him. He turned and mounted his horse with practiced ease. Before riding away, he looked back at her one more time. One more thing, Mrs. Grayson. Accidents happen on ranches. Equipment fails. Fires start. People get hurt. His voice was casual, conversational. It would be tragic if something happened to you or your husband before this matter is resolved. So much easier if you just walked away. Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn standing in the doorway with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. Caleb found her there 5 minutes later, still holding the envelope. Who was that? He asked. Hale's lawyer. He brought this. She handed him the notice. Caleb read it, his face going pale. They're calling the full loan. We can't possibly pay this by January. That's the point. They're trying to force us into surrender. Evelyn's voice was steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. He said if we withdraw the accusations and sign statements clearing Hale, they'll restore the original terms. And if we don't, we lose everything. And he implied that accidents might happen to us if we keep pushing. Caleb crumpled the notice in his fist. That son of a... Don't. Evelyn caught his arm. Getting angry won't help. We need to think. Think about what? We just painted a target on our backs and we can't even make the payment they're demanding. He looked at her, something breaking in his expression. I never should have let you send those letters. This is my fight, my debt. You shouldn't be threatened because of my mistakes. They're not just your mistakes, and this isn't just your fight anymore. Evelyn's grip tightened on his arm. We did this together, and we'll face whatever comes together, even if it means losing the ranch. Even then, she pulled him inside, closing the door against the cold. But we're not lost yet. We knew Hale would retaliate. This is just the first move. First move? Evelyn, he's calling a $23,000 loan we can't pay and threatening our lives. That's not a first move. That's checkmate. No, it's desperation. Evelyn was already pacing, her mind working through the implications. Think about it. If Hale was confident the federal investigation would go nowhere, why threaten us? Why demand we recant? He's worried. Caleb wanted to argue, but stopped, considering. You think the letters actually reach someone who cares? I think they reach someone, and Hale knows it. Otherwise, he'd just wait until January and take the ranch quietly. She turned to face him. We rattled him. Now we need to figure out our next move before he makes his. That night, they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, trying to find options that didn't exist. Even if they sold every head of cattle, every piece of equipment, the house itself, they couldn't raise $23,000 by January. The math simply didn't work. What if we went to another bank? Caleb suggested without much hope. With what collateral? Hale holds the mortgage. No bank would touch us. Evelyn rubbed her tired eyes. And even if they would, we'd just be trading one debt for another. So we're trapped. We're cornered. There's a difference. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Trapped means no options. Cornered means the options are all bad, but they still exist. What options? Evelyn started making a list. 1. We pay Hale and lose everything anyway because we'd have to sell the ranch to do it. 2. We default. Hale forecloses, we lose everything. 3. We run, abandon the ranch, and everyone counting on us. Those are all terrible. I know. That's why we need option 4. Which is, we stall. Evelyn tapped the pen against the table. Hale wants a decision by January. We make sure he doesn't get one. We file legal challenges, demand audits, request payment schedule reviews. We throw every procedural obstacle we can think of into his path and buy time for the federal investigation to actually do something. Caleb frowned. That would require a lawyer, a good one, which costs money we don't have. Then we find a lawyer who works for something other than money. Evelyn was already thinking through possibilities. Someone with a grudge against Hale. Someone who wants to make a name fighting corruption. Someone... A knock at the door interrupted her. They both froze. It was past 9 o'clock, full dark outside. Nobody visited ranches after sundown unless something was wrong. Caleb grabbed the rifle from above the door. Evelyn positioned herself where she could see whoever was outside without being an easy target. "Who's there?" Caleb called. "Jim Richardson, from the general store." The voice was muffled through the door but recognizable. "I need to talk to you, both of you." Caleb and Evelyn exchanged glances. Richardson was the rancher who'd lost everything to Hale 3 years ago. They'd tried to get his testimony for the investigation, but he'd refused, too broken to fight anymore. Caleb opened the door slowly. Richardson stood in the lamplight, looking older than his 45 years. His hands were shaking, and not from cold. "I heard Hale's lawyer came by today," he said without preamble. "I heard what he told you." "Word travels fast," Evelyn said. "It's a small valley, and people talk." Richardson stepped inside when Caleb gestured. "I came because I should have helped you before, when you asked for my testimony." "You don't owe us anything," Caleb said. "Maybe not, but I owe it to myself." Richardson pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is the original contract I signed with Hale, not the one his lawyer showed the court when they took my ranch. The original." Evelyn took it carefully. "What's the difference?" "The interest rate, the repayment terms. Half the clauses in the court version don't exist in this one." Richardson's voice shook with old anger. "They forged a new contract and used it to steal my land. I knew it at the time, but I couldn't prove it. My word against Hale's lawyers, and everyone knows how that ends." "Why are you showing us this now?" Evelyn asked. "Because I heard you actually sent evidence to federal investigators. Because you didn't just roll over like everyone expected." He met her eyes. "Because someone needs to stop Hale before he destroys every family in this valley. And because hiding made me a coward, and I'm tired of being a coward." Evelyn looked at the contract, comparing it mentally to the versions she'd seen in other cases. If Richardson was right, this was the missing piece. Direct proof of forgery, not just financial manipulation. "If we use this, Hale will come after you," she said quietly. "He'll know it came from you. Let him come. I've got nothing left for him to take except my pride, and I'm done giving him that." Richardson straightened his shoulders. "I'll testify. I'll swear to anything you need. Just promise me you'll actually fight him." "We will," Caleb said. "Even if it costs you everything?" Evelyn and Caleb looked at each other. In that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, commitment, the kind of partnership that only forms when people face impossible odds together. "Even then," Evelyn said. Richardson nodded slowly. "Then you've got my testimony, and anything else I can give you." After he left, Evelyn spread the contract on the table next to the court documents from Richardson's foreclosure case. Side by side, the differences were stark. Entire paragraphs existed in one that didn't appear in the other. Interest rates that differed by 3 percentage points. Repayment schedules that made the debt impossible to clear. "This is forgery," Caleb said, staring at the documents. "Actual, provable forgery." "It's more than that." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she made notes. "It's proof that Hale's system isn't just exploitative. It's criminal. The financial manipulation could be argued as harsh, but legal. This can't." "So what do we do with it?" "We add it to the evidence file, and we make sure it gets into the right hands." She looked up at him. "But we need to be smart about this. If Hale finds out we have the original contract, he'll do whatever it takes to make it disappear, along with anyone who's seen it." The weight of what she was saying settled over them. "We should make copies," Caleb said finally. "Multiple copies. Store them in different places. And we need to tell someone outside the valley what we have. Someone who can make sure the evidence survives, even if we don't." Evelyn hated saying it out loud, but they both needed to face the reality. We're not just fighting fraud anymore. We're fighting people willing to kill to protect their profits. That night, they worked until dawn making copies of Richardson's contract. Evelyn's hand cramped from writing, but she didn't stop. Each copy represented a chance that the truth would survive, even if they didn't. The next morning, Caleb rode to 3 different towns, depositing sealed envelopes with instructions to mail them to specific addresses if anything happened to him or Evelyn. Insurance policies written in ink and sworn testimony. When he returned that evening, he found Evelyn at the desk, writing another letter. "Who's that to?" he asked. "A lawyer in Helena. Someone who might actually help us." She didn't look up from the page. "His name is Robert Chen. He handled some civil rights cases last year. won a judgment against a mining company that was using immigrant labor under false contracts. You think he'll take a case against Hale? I think he'll take a case against corruption, especially if it involves forged documents and systematic fraud. Evelyn finished the letter and sealed it. And if he won't, maybe he knows someone who will. We need legal help, Caleb. We can't fight this alone anymore. 3 days later, a response came back. Robert Chen would meet with them in Helena on January 10th. He made no promises, but he was willing to review their evidence. It wasn't much, but it was something. The valley changed after Webb's visit. Word spread about the ultimatum, about Hale calling the full loan. Some families withdrew their support, too frightened of retaliation. Others doubled down, bringing more evidence, more testimony, more stories of systematic theft. Thomas Bridger showed up with 3 other ranchers Evelyn hadn't met before. They crowded into the Grayson kitchen, nervous and angry in equal measure. "We heard what Hale's trying to do," Bridger said. "We wanted you to know you're not alone in this." "Hale's threatening all of us now," one of the other ranchers added. "His people have been making the rounds, warning us what happens to families who cooperate with federal investigators." "What did you tell them?" Evelyn asked. "Told them to go to hell." The man's grin was fierce. "I'm Martin Cross, lost my southern pasture to Hale 2 years ago. Been looking for a way to fight back ever since." The third rancher, a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair, stepped forward. "Elizabeth Tanner. My husband died fighting Hale's foreclosure. Heart gave out from the stress. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to actually challenge that bastard." Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. These weren't victims anymore. They were allies. "Hale's lawyer said there wasn't a judge in the territory who'd side with us," she said. "How many of you believe that?" Silence. Then Bridger spoke up. "Every judge who matters is either afraid of Hale or bought by him. That's just reality." "Then we don't fight him in territorial courts." Evelyn pulled out the letters she'd been drafting. "We fight him in federal court. We make this case so big, so public, and so well documented that local corruption can't bury it." "That'll take time," Martin Cross said. "Time most of us don't have. Hale's calling loans, threatening foreclosures. Some folks won't make it to a federal trial. Then we buy time." Evelyn looked around the kitchen at the desperate, determined faces. "We file legal challenges. We demand audits. We request reviews and investigations and anything else that puts procedural obstacles in Hale's way. Every week we delay is another week for federal investigators to build their case." "That still requires lawyers," Elizabeth Tanner pointed out. "Good ones, expensive ones. I'm working on that." Evelyn explained about Robert Chen, about the meeting in Helena. "He might help. He might know others who will, but either way we need to present him with a case so strong he can't refuse it." "What do you need from us?" Bridger asked. "Everything you have. Contracts, payment records, correspondence with Hale's people. Anything that shows the pattern of fraud." Evelyn handed out paper and pens. "And I need written testimony from each of you. Detailed accounts of your dealings with Hale, dates and amounts. Everything you can remember." They worked through the afternoon, the kitchen table covered with papers and bitter memories made tangible in ink. Stories emerged that made Evelyn's anger burn hotter. Families destroyed, lives ruined, children losing their inheritances to a man who already had more money than he could spend. By evening, they had testimonies from 7 families. Combined with the documents Evelyn had already gathered, it was starting to look less like a complaint and more like a criminal case. After everyone left, Caleb found Evelyn staring at the mountain of evidence. "You did good today," he said quietly. "We haven't won anything yet." "No, but you gave people hope. That's worth something." Evelyn wanted to believe that. But hope didn't pay debts or stop foreclosures. Hope didn't protect people from men like Hale who played for keeps. "We're running out of time," she said. "January's in 2 weeks. Even if Chen agrees to help, we can't stop Hale from calling the loan. Maybe we don't need to stop him. Maybe we just need to survive long enough for the federal case to matter." Caleb pulled her away from the desk. "You've been working 18-hour days for 2 months. You need rest." "I can't rest. There's too much—" "Evelyn." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse. Take one night. Just one." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion hit her like a physical weight, and she realized he was right. She'd been running on anger and determination for so long she'd forgotten how to stop. "One night," she agreed. They sat by the fire while snow fell outside, not talking, just existing together in the quiet. Somewhere in the darkness, Victor Hale was planning his next move. Somewhere in Helena, federal investigators might or might not be building a case. Somewhere in the valley, desperate families were counting on her to be smart enough to beat a man who'd never lost. But right now, in this moment, Evelyn let herself just be still. Caleb's hand found hers in the firelight. She didn't pull away. "When this is over," he said quietly, "assuming we survive it, what do you want?" "I don't know. I've spent so long just trying to survive, I never thought about wanting things." "Think about it now." Evelyn stared into the fire, considering. "A place that's actually mine. Not borrowed, not temporary. Mine. You have that here. Do I? Or is it just another situation I'll have to leave when things go bad?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "I meant what I said when we got married. I was looking for a partner, someone to stand with, not just someone to keep house." His thumb rubbed across her knuckles. "You've become that. More than that. And whatever happens with Hale, whatever we lose or keep, this place is yours as much as mine. You fought for it, bled for it. That makes it home." Something in Evelyn's chest cracked open. She'd spent her whole life keeping people at arm's length, protecting herself from the pain of loss. But Caleb had slipped past those defenses without her noticing, and now she cared about this ranch, these people, this fight in ways that terrified her. Caring meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant pain, but maybe pain was the price of actually living instead of just surviving. "I want this to work," she said quietly. "The ranch, us, all of it. It will." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight for it with everything I have." He met her eyes. "And I can promise you're not alone in this. Not anymore." They sat together until the fire burned low, and for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Evelyn let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth keeping. The meeting with Robert Chen was scheduled for January 10th. That gave them 8 days to prepare. Evelyn organized every piece of evidence into a comprehensive file: contracts, testimonies, financial records, and Richardson's smoking gun original agreement. She created timelines showing the pattern of fraud across multiple operations. She drafted a summary that laid out the case in clear, undeniable terms. Caleb arranged for transportation to Helena and made sure the ranch would be looked after while they were gone. Bridger and Martin Cross agreed to check on the cattle and keep watch for any of Hale's men trying to cause trouble. On January 9th, they loaded their evidence into a locked case and prepared to leave at dawn. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She stood at the bedroom window watching moonlight reflect off snow, her mind running through everything that could go wrong. Chen might refuse the case. The federal investigation might have stalled. Hale might make his move while they were away. "Stop thinking so loud," Caleb murmured from the bed. "I can hear you worrying from here." "I can't help it. We're betting everything on a lawyer we've never met being willing to take on the most powerful man in the territory. We're betting on the evidence being too strong to ignore." Caleb sat up. "Come here." Evelyn crossed to the bed and sat beside him. He pulled her close, his warmth solid and real in the darkness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we did everything we could," he said quietly. "We documented the fraud. We gathered the testimony. We gave people hope when they had none. That matters. Even if Chen says no." "Does it? If we lose the ranch, if Hale wins anyway?" "Yes. Because we fought. Because we stood up when everyone said it was impossible." His arms tightened around her. "My father spent his last years broken by Hale. He died thinking he'd failed, that he'd lost everything that mattered. I won't die like that. Even if we lose, I'll know we fought with everything we had. That's worth something." Evelyn leaned into him, letting herself take comfort in his strength. "When did you become so wise?" "Around the time I married a woman too stubborn to quit." She could hear the smile in his voice. "You've changed everything, Evelyn. This ranch, this valley, me. Win or lose, you've already made a difference." She turned to look at him in the moonlight. "I'm glad I came here. Even with everything that's happened, I'm glad. So am I." They sat together in the quiet darkness, and Evelyn realized that somewhere along the way, this arrangement of convenience had become something real. She loved this man, his quiet strength, his determination, his refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. She loved him, and that was terrifying, because love meant she had more to lose than just a ranch or financial security. Love meant her heart was invested in an outcome she couldn't control. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the things worth fighting for were exactly the things that scared you most. Dawn came too quickly. They loaded the evidence case into the wagon, said goodbye to the ranchers who'd gathered to see them off, and started the long journey to Helena. The road was frozen mud and patches of snow, the winter wind cutting through even their warmest clothes. Evelyn held the evidence case on her lap, one hand resting on the locked lid. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked, was inside this box. Proof that Victor Hale was a criminal, evidence that could save 7 families or get them all killed. No pressure. "What do we do if Chen says no?" she asked as the miles rolled past. "We find another lawyer, and another, until someone says yes." Caleb's jaw was set with determination. "We don't quit. That's the one thing we don't do." "Even if it costs everything?" "Especially then." They reached Helena just after dark on January 10th. The city was bigger than Red Hollow, with actual streets and buildings made of brick and stone. Electric lights glowed in some windows, luxury that made Evelyn's ranch life seem primitive by comparison. Robert Chen's office was above a dry goods store on Main Street. They climbed narrow stairs to a door with his name painted in simple black letters. Robert Chen, attorney at law. Evelyn knocked. "Come in." The office was small but organized, lined with law books and filing cabinets. Chen himself sat behind a desk covered with papers, a man in his late 30s with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. He stood when they entered. "Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, please sit." His voice carried the precise diction of someone educated back east. "I've reviewed the preliminary information you sent. I'll be honest, I'm intrigued, but I need to see the full evidence before making any commitments." Evelyn set the case on his desk and unlocked it. "Everything's organized chronologically. Contracts, financial records, testimony from 7 families, and one original contract that proves document forgery." Chen's eyebrows rose. "Forgery?" "Victor Hale's been altering contracts after they're signed, then using the forged versions in court proceedings." She pulled out Richardson's documents. "This is the original. This is what his lawyers presented to the court. You'll notice they're not the same." Chen examined both documents carefully, his expression growing darker. He spent the next 2 hours going through everything, reading testimonies, checking financial records, comparing contracts across multiple cases. Finally, he sat back and looked at them. "This is the most comprehensive documentation of systematic fraud I've seen in 15 years of practice," he said quietly. "If even half of this holds up under scrutiny, Victor Hale is going to prison." Evelyn felt hope flare in her chest. "Then you'll take the case?" "I'll take the case, but I need you both to understand what you're up against." Chen's voice was serious. "Hale has connections throughout the territorial government. He has money for the best lawyers, and he has a reputation for destroying anyone who opposes him. Fighting this will be dangerous, expensive, and might not succeed even with all this evidence." "We know," Caleb said. "Do you?" "Because once I file this case, there's no going back. Hale will come after you with everything he has." Chen met their eyes. "I've seen what men like him do to people who threaten their power. It's not pretty." "We've already been threatened," Evelyn said. "He's calling Caleb's loan early. We have 3 weeks before foreclosure. Then we file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning. We'll argue that the loan call is retaliatory and request a stay on all collection actions pending investigation of the underlying fraud." Chen was already making notes. "It's a long shot, but it might buy you time." "What about the federal investigation?" Caleb asked. "I'll contact the Department of the Interior directly. With this evidence, they'll have to open a formal inquiry." Chen looked at the mountain of documents. "This isn't just civil fraud anymore. This is criminal conspiracy, document forgery, potentially racketeering if we can prove Hale's operation extends beyond this territory." Evelyn and Caleb exchanged glances. They'd hoped for help. This was more than help. This was war. "What do you need from us?" Evelyn asked. "Courage, patience, and absolute honesty about everything, no matter how bad it looks." Chen pulled out a legal pad. "Now, let's start from the beginning. I want to know everything about Victor Hale, his operation, and everyone involved." They talked until midnight, Chen asking questions and taking notes, building the framework of a case that would either destroy Hale's empire or get them all killed trying. When they finally left his office, Evelyn felt exhausted but alive in a way she hadn't in months. They had a lawyer, they had a plan, they had a chance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep fighting. The ride back to Red Hollow took 2 days through weather that turned vicious halfway home. Snow came down in sheets, wind howling across the open prairie like something alive and angry. Evelyn huddled under blankets in the wagon while Caleb drove, his face set against the cold, refusing to stop even when visibility dropped to almost nothing. They had 3 weeks until foreclosure. Every hour mattered. Chen said the injunction filing would happen tomorrow, Evelyn shouted over the wind. How long before we hear if it worked? Could be days. Could be weeks. Caleb's hands were white-knuckled on the reins. Depends on which judge gets assigned and whether Hale's people get to them first. You think Chen can actually win this? I think he's the best shot we have. Caleb glanced at her. But winning in court and surviving until the trial are two different things. Hale knows we have evidence now. He's going to do whatever it takes to make sure it never sees a courtroom. The unspoken threat hung between them like the frozen air. Whatever it takes could mean a lot of things, none of them good. They reached the ranch late on the second night, half frozen and exhausted. Thomas Bridger met them at the door, his expression grim. You've got trouble, he said without preamble. Hale's men came by yesterday, 3 of them, said they were conducting an inventory assessment in preparation for foreclosure proceedings. Did you let them in? Caleb asked. Hell no. Told them they could come back with a court order or not at all. Bridger stepped aside to let them in. But they weren't happy about it, made some threats before they left. What kind of threats? Evelyn asked, though she suspected she knew. The usual: accidents happen, barns burn, cattle wander off. Bridger's jaw tightened. One of them looked at my place too, said it'd be a shame if something happened to folks who stuck their noses where they didn't belong. Caleb slammed his fist on the table. Damn it! I knew they'd come after everyone who helped us. We all knew the risks. Bridger's voice was steady. But I wanted you to know what you're coming home to. Hale's not playing games anymore. He's actively trying to scare people into backing down. Is it working? Evelyn asked quietly. Bridger hesitated. Martin Cross pulled his testimony, said his family couldn't risk it. The words hit like a physical blow. Cross had been one of their strongest witnesses, his documentation spanning 5 years of systematic fraud. Anyone else? Caleb's voice was flat. Elizabeth Tanner's still in. So am I. Jim Richardson, too. Bridger met their eyes. But people are scared, and I can't blame them. Hale's making it real clear what happens to folks who oppose him. After Bridger left, Evelyn and Caleb sat in the kitchen, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Losing witnesses meant losing credibility. Losing credibility meant losing the case. We need to talk to Cross, Evelyn said. Find out exactly what happened. See if there's anything we can do to change his mind. Or we could let him walk away. Caleb's voice was tired. He's got a wife and 3 kids. Maybe pulling his testimony is the smart choice. And when Hale takes his ranch anyway, when he destroys Cross's family just like all the others? Evelyn stood, pacing. Walking away doesn't keep people safe from men like Hale. It just makes them easier targets. You can't force people to be brave. I'm not trying to force anything. I'm trying to remind them why they agreed to fight in the first place. She turned to face him. Cross gave us testimony because he wanted justice, because he was tired of being afraid. That doesn't just disappear because Hale sends some thugs to make threats. Maybe it does. Maybe that's how fear works. Evelyn heard the exhaustion in his voice and realized they were both running on empty. 2 days of brutal travel, the stress of the meeting with Chen, the constant weight of knowing they were in a fight they might not survive. It was taking a toll. We'll talk to him tomorrow, she said quietly, after we've both slept. Right now we're too tired to think straight. Caleb nodded without argument, which told her just how worn down he was. They went upstairs in silence, the house creaking around them in the winter wind. That night, Evelyn dreamed of fire. She woke gasping, convinced she smelled smoke, but the house was dark and quiet. Just a nightmare. Just her mind playing out fears in sleep. She couldn't get back to sleep after that. She lay in the darkness listening to Caleb breathe beside her, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Witnesses backing out, the injunction denied, Hale's men burning them out in the middle of the night, 100 small disasters that would end with them losing everything. "Stop it," Caleb murmured in the dark. "I can hear you thinking again." "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He rolled toward her. "I can't sleep either. Keep seeing Hale's face when we finally beat him. Assuming we actually beat him." "We will." "You sound more sure than you did this afternoon." "I'm not sure at all." Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "I'm terrified, but being terrified and giving up are two different things." Caleb reached for her hand in the darkness. "What if we can't do this? What if we're just two people trying to fight an empire with nothing but paperwork and hope? Then we're two people who tried. That's more than most can say." She squeezed his hand. "My father gave up. He stopped fighting and it killed him. I won't do that. I can't. Even if fighting kills you instead? Even then." She meant it. "At least I'll die trying instead of dying defeated." They lay in silence for a while, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other's presence. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall across the valley where Victor Hale was probably sleeping soundly in his mansion, confident that fear would do what his lawyers couldn't, drive the opposition into surrender. He was wrong. But he didn't know that yet. Morning came gray and cold. Evelyn woke to find Caleb already up, making coffee in the kitchen. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. "I'm going to see Cross today," she announced. "Find out what changed his mind." "I'll come with you." "No, you need to stay here. Make sure Hale's men don't try anything while I'm gone." She poured herself coffee. "Besides, Cross might talk more freely without you there. Man-to-man pride, all that nonsense." Caleb wanted to argue but recognized the logic. "Be careful. If Hale's people are watching, they're always watching. That doesn't change what needs to be done." She drank her coffee standing up, already planning the conversation in her head. "I'll take the rifle. I'll be back before dark." The ride to the Cross Ranch took an hour through snow that had started falling again. Evelyn kept the rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the white landscape for any sign of trouble. She saw nothing but empty land and distant mountains, but that didn't mean she was alone. Hale's men could be anywhere. Martin Cross was repairing a fence when she arrived. He looked up at the sound of her horse, and something in his face closed off immediately. "Mrs. Grayson, I heard you went to Helena." "We did. We have a lawyer now. Robert Chen. He's filing for an emergency injunction today." Evelyn dismounted but stayed near her horse, reading Cross's body language. "Bridger said you pulled your testimony." Cross drove another nail into the fence post, not meeting her eyes. "That's right. Want to tell me why?" "Does it matter?" "It does to me, and to the 6 other families counting on you to help stop Hale." Cross finally looked at her, and she saw fear there mixed with shame. 3 men came to my house 2 nights ago. Asked about my kids, where they go to school, what time my wife walks to the general store, whether we lock our doors at night." His voice shook. "They didn't threaten directly. They didn't have to." Evelyn felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened. But it did happen, and it'll happen again if I don't back down." Cross threw the hammer down. "I've got 3 kids, Mrs. Grayson. 3 kids who need a father more than they need justice. Can you understand that?" "I can." And she could. But understanding didn't change what was at stake. "What I don't understand is how you think backing down will protect them. Hale doesn't stop at intimidation. He takes everything. You think your kids will be safer when you've lost this ranch and you're working somebody else's land for pennies? At least they'll be alive. Will they? Or will Hale just find another way to squeeze you until there's nothing left?" Evelyn's voice was quiet but fierce. "I watched my father die from this exact thing, Cross. A powerful man destroyed him piece by piece until he had nothing left to live for. And you know what the worst part was? My father spent his last days believing it was his fault, that he'd failed us, that he wasn't strong enough or smart enough to protect his family." Cross's jaw tightened. "Your father's situation isn't mine, isn't it? Different name, same pattern. Hale will take your land, then he'll take your dignity. Then he'll take everything else until you're just another broken man who gave up when it mattered." She stepped closer. "Your kids don't need a father who's safe, Cross. They need a father who fights. who shows them that sometimes you stand up even when it's terrifying, because that's what being human means. Easy for you to say. You don't have kids. The words hit harder than he probably meant them to, but Evelyn didn't flinch. You're right, I don't. But I had a father who stopped fighting, and I'm telling you what that does to children. It breaks them. It teaches them that power wins and resistance is pointless. Is that really what you want to teach your kids? Cross looked away, his hands clenched into fists. What do you want from me? I want you to honor the commitment you made. I want you to remember why you agreed to testify in the first place. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. You told me you were tired of being afraid. Has that changed? No, but being tired of something doesn't make it go away. No, it doesn't. Fear's always there. The question is whether you let it make your decisions for you. She pulled out a folded paper from her coat. This is the emergency injunction Chen's filing today. It argues that Hale's loan calls and intimidation tactics are retaliatory actions designed to obstruct justice. Your testimony about those men threatening your family is evidence supporting that argument. Cross took the paper but didn't unfold it. And if the injunction fails? If Hale comes after my family anyway? Then we deal with it together. All of us. Evelyn met his eyes. That's the difference between fighting alone and fighting as a group. Hale's used to picking off isolated families one at a time. He's not used to people standing together. You really think we can beat him? I think we have a chance. A real one. She gestured to the paper. Chen reviewed all the evidence. He said it's the strongest fraud case he's seen in 15 years. But only if we have witnesses willing to testify. Without you, we lose credibility. Without credibility, we lose everything. Cross unfolded the paper and read it slowly. Evelyn waited, watching emotions play across his face. Fear, hope, anger, determination, all fighting for dominance. Finally, he looked up. If I do this, I need protection for my family. Real protection, not just promises. Chen's requesting federal marshal protection for all witnesses. It's part of the injunction. Evelyn had pushed for that specifically, knowing fear was the primary weapon Hale had left. If the request is granted, your family will have armed federal protection until this is resolved. And if it's not granted, then the rest of us watch out for each other. Bridger, Tanner, Richardson, Caleb, and me, we make sure nobody faces this alone. She held out her hand. I'm asking you to trust that we're stronger together than we are apart. That's all I've got to offer. Cross stared at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he shook it. I'll testify. But if anything happens to my kids because of this, it won't, I promise you. We'll protect them. Evelyn squeezed his hand. Thank you. This matters more than you know. After leaving Cross's ranch, Evelyn felt a small measure of relief. One witness restored wasn't much, but it was better than watching their case crumble one frightened family at a time. She was halfway home when she noticed the riders. 2 men on horseback, keeping pace with her about a quarter-mile back. Too far to identify, but close enough to make their presence known. Following her. Making sure she knew she was being watched. Evelyn's hand moved to the rifle. She didn't draw it, didn't even shift it obviously, but her fingers curled around the stock in a way that said she knew it was there and would use it if necessary. The riders stayed at that exact distance all the way back to the ranch. When she arrived and went inside, they stopped on the ridge overlooking the property, just sitting there, watching. Caleb saw them too. How long have they been following you? Since I left Cross's place. Maybe before. Evelyn set down the rifle and peeled off her coat. They want us to know we're being monitored, want us scared. Is it working? I'm scared, but I'm also angry. And angry is more useful than scared. She moved to the window, studying the distant riders. They're not going to do anything while it's daylight, too visible. But tonight we take shifts keeping watch. Caleb was already loading extra ammunition. I'll take first watch. You need rest. I'm not going to be able to sleep knowing there are armed men watching the house. Then you'll lie down and rest anyway. We're going to need all our strength for what's coming. His voice left no room for argument. Please, Evelyn, let me do this. She wanted to protest, but exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. Wake me at midnight. We'll switch. Caleb nodded. Cross agreed to testify again? He did. After I reminded him what's at stake and that Chen's requesting federal protection. She rubbed her tired eyes. How many other families do you think Hale threatened? All of them, probably. Some will fold, some won't. Caleb checked the rifle's chamber. We work with whoever's brave enough to stand. That night, Evelyn lay in bed listening to Caleb move around downstairs, checking windows and doors, maintaining his watch. The riders on the ridge had disappeared with darkness, but that didn't mean they'd left. More likely they were closer now, hidden in shadows, waiting for an opportunity. For what, exactly, she wasn't sure. Hale needed them alive until after the foreclosure. Dead martyrs might attract exactly the kind of federal attention he was trying to avoid. But alive and frightened, alive and discredited, alive and broken? That served his purposes perfectly. She must have dozed despite herself, because Caleb woke her at midnight by gently shaking her shoulder. Your turn. Nothing's happened, but I keep hearing sounds outside. Might be nothing. Might be them testing our awareness. Evelyn took the rifle and went downstairs. The house was dark except for one lamp burning low in the kitchen. She positioned herself where she could see all the windows, the rifle across her knees, and settled in for a long few hours. The sounds came around 2 a.m. Not loud, not obvious, just small noises that could have been wind or animals, but probably weren't. Footsteps on frozen ground, the creak of someone testing the barn door, the soft nicker of a horse disturbed by unfamiliar presence. Evelyn moved to the back window and saw a shadow separate from the barn, human-shaped, moving with purpose. A second shadow near the equipment shed. They were trying to get to the cattle. She didn't hesitate. She opened the window just wide enough to stick the rifle barrel through and fired one shot into the air. The sound cracked across the frozen night like thunder. The shadows froze for half a heartbeat, then bolted, running for the tree line where horses waited. Caleb appeared on the stairs, pulling on his coat. What happened? 2 of them near the barn, probably trying to scatter the cattle, or worse. Evelyn kept the rifle trained on the spot where the shadows had disappeared. They're gone now. You sure? No, but they know we're armed and awake. That might be enough to keep them at bay until morning. They stayed up the rest of the night, watching and waiting, but nothing else moved in the darkness. When dawn finally broke gray and cold, they found evidence confirming what Evelyn had seen. Boot prints near the barn, marks where someone had tried to jimmy the lock on the cattle pen. They wanted to stampede them, Caleb said, studying the tracks. Scatter them across the valley so we'd lose count, lose track. Easy to claim we sold some under the table or that we're inflating our asset counts to avoid foreclosure. Trying to make us look dishonest before the trial even starts. Evelyn's anger burned cold and focused. Everything Hale does serves multiple purposes. Intimidation? Yes. But also building a case that we're unreliable witnesses. What do? We document everything. Every threat, every incident, every attempt at sabotage. She started taking notes about the boot prints, the scratches on the lock. All of it goes to Chen as evidence of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. They spent the morning photographing evidence and writing detailed accounts of the previous night. Around noon, a writer arrived from Helena, a courier with a message from Robert Chen. Evelyn tore open the envelope with shaking hands. The emergency injunction had been filed. A hearing was scheduled for January 20th, 10 days away. Until then, all collection actions against the Grayson Ranch were temporarily stayed pending judicial review. It wasn't a victory, but it was a reprieve. 10 days, Caleb said, reading over her shoulder. That gets us past the original foreclosure deadline. Barely, and only if the judge approves the stay at the hearing. Evelyn kept reading. Chen wants us back in Helena by the 19th. He needs to prep us for testimony. What about the other families? Are they protected too? Evelyn scanned the letter. Chen's filing similar motions for anyone who testifies, but it'll take time to process them all. Until then, a sound outside cut her off. Horses. Multiple riders approaching fast. Caleb grabbed the rifle while Evelyn moved to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. 6 riders, all armed, led by Marcus Webb in his expensive suit looking completely out of place on horseback. Stay inside, Caleb said, moving toward the door. Like hell. Evelyn grabbed her own rifle. We face this together, remember? They stepped out onto the porch as the riders pulled to a stop in the yard. Webb dismounted with theatrical slowness, making a show of brushing dust from his coat. Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, what a pleasure. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. I trust you received Mr. Hale's foreclosure notice? We received it. We also received a temporary stay from a federal judge. Evelyn kept her voice level. All collection actions are suspended pending investigation. Webb's smile never wavered. Ah, yes, your little legal maneuver. Very clever. But temporary stays are just that, temporary. And when they expire, the debt comes due. All of it. We'll see what the judge says about that. We certainly will. Webb pulled out another envelope. In the meantime, Mr. Hale wanted me to deliver this. A formal notice that he's calling the loans of every rancher who provided testimony against him. Thomas Bridger, Elizabeth Tanner, Jim Richardson, all of them, debt in full, due immediately. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Hale was going after everyone at once, trying to force them into financial collapse before the hearing could even happen. That's witness intimidation, Caleb said, his voice hard. Illegal retaliation. That's business, Mr. Grayson. Mr. Hale has the legal right to call his loans when he sees fit. Webb's eyes glinted with malice. Of course, if those families wanted to reconsider their testimony, arrangements might be made. Mr. Hale is a reasonable man when dealing with reasonable people. Get off my property. Evelyn's finger moved to the rifle trigger. And tell Hale that threatening our witnesses only proves we're right about him. Webb's smile finally dropped. You're making a mistake. A fatal one, perhaps. Mr. Hale has been remarkably patient with your husband's incompetence, but patience has limits. So does my tolerance for threats. You've got 30 seconds to get back on that horse before I shoot you for trespassing. For a moment, Webb looked like he might call her bluff. Then he saw something in her eyes that made him reconsider. He mounted up without another word, his armed riders falling in behind him. January 31st, Mrs. Grayson. That's when the stay expires if the judge doesn't grant your injunction. And when it does, Mr. Hale will take everything you have. Sleep well. They watched the riders disappear down the road. When they were out of sight, Evelyn's hands finally started shaking. We need to warn the others, she said. Bridger, Tanner, Richardson, they need to know what's coming. They probably already do. Hale wouldn't send Webb here without hitting them first. Caleb's jaw was tight with fury. He's trying to make them choose between their homes and their testimony. Then we remind them that giving up their testimony won't save their homes. Hale will take them anyway, just like he's taken everything else. Evelyn was already moving inside, grabbing paper to write messages. We need to get everyone together, tonight if possible. Let them know about the injunction, about Chen's protective filings, about the fact that we're closer to beating this than we've ever been. And if they don't come, if they're too scared, then we fight with whoever does come. But we fight. She looked up at him. We don't have the luxury of giving up, Caleb. Not now, not ever. That evening, despite the risk, despite the fear, despite everything working against them, 7 people gathered in the Grayson kitchen. Thomas Bridger and his wife, Elizabeth Tanner, Jim Richardson, Martin Cross, who'd brought his rifle and looked ready to use it. 2 other ranchers Evelyn had never met before but who'd heard about the fight and wanted in. They crowded around the table, these desperate, determined people, while Evelyn explained the situation. Hale's calling all the loans. Everyone who testified, everyone who helped gather evidence, he's trying to force you into foreclosure before the hearing. She met each person's eyes in turn. He's betting you'll withdraw your testimony to save your homes. But here's the truth. Withdrawing won't save anything. He'll take your land anyway because that's what he does. So what do we do? Elizabeth Tanner asked. We can't pay these debts. None of us can. We don't pay. We fight. Evelyn spread out Chen's letter. Robert Chen is filing protective motions for every witness. It'll take a few days, but he's arguing that calling these loans is illegal retaliation and witness intimidation. If the judge agrees, all collection actions get stayed just like ours. And if the judge doesn't agree, one of the new ranchers asked, then we're in exactly the same position we'd be in if we gave up now, facing foreclosure with nothing to lose. Except if we fight, we have a chance. If we surrender, we have none. Evelyn's voice was fierce. I'm not going to lie to you. This is dangerous. Hale will keep coming after us, but together we're strong enough to stand. Alone, we fall one by one. Silence fell over the kitchen. These people were exhausted, frightened, pushed to the edge of collapse. Everything Evelyn was asking them to do was insane. And yet, one by one, they nodded. I'm in, Bridger said. Already lost everything once. Won't do it again without a fight. Me too, Elizabeth Tanner agreed. My husband died fighting Hale. I'm not dishonoring his memory by giving up now. Martin Cross looked at his hands, then at Evelyn. My kids need to see their father stand for something. I'm in. The others echoed the same commitment, and Evelyn felt something fierce and bright burn in her chest. Hope, maybe, or determination, or just the simple human refusal to go down without swinging. All right, she said quietly. Then here's what we do. We document every threat, every intimidation tactic, every illegal move Hale makes. We send it all to Chen. We make sure that when this gets to court, the judge sees exactly what kind of man Victor Hale really is. And we watch each other's backs. Nobody faces this alone. Agreed? Agreed, they said in unison. After everyone left, Caleb and Evelyn stood on the porch watching them ride away into the darkness. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest, Caleb said. Probably both. Evelyn leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. But it was necessary. They needed to know they're not alone. Neither are we. He pulled her close. Whatever happens, we face it together. Together, she agreed. The next 9 days blurred together in a haze of preparation and constant vigilance. Chen sent detailed instructions for the hearing. Witnesses were prepped. Evidence was organized. Every piece of the case was reviewed and refined until it was as strong as they could make it. Hale's harassment continued. Riders watched the ranch. Supplies ordered from town mysteriously never arrived. Small fires broke out and had to be extinguished. Nothing major, nothing provable, just a constant campaign of low-level terrorism designed to wear them down. It didn't work. If anything, it made them more determined. On January 19th, Evelyn and Caleb loaded the wagon with their evidence and started the journey to Helena. This time, they traveled with Thomas Bridger and Jim Richardson. Safety in numbers and the quiet comfort of knowing they weren't facing this alone. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked, came down to one judge's decision about whether their case had merit. That night, in a small hotel in Helena, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She paced the room while Caleb tried to rest, her mind running through every possible scenario. Come to bed, Caleb said finally. Wearing a hole in the floor won't change what happens tomorrow. I know, She stopped, trying to articulate the fear that lived in her chest. What if we're wrong? What if the judge sides with Hale? What if all of this was for nothing? Then it was for nothing. But at least we tried. Caleb sat up, patting the bed beside him. Come here. She sat, and he wrapped his arms around her from behind, his warmth solid and real. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said quietly, you've already changed everything. These families were isolated and hopeless before you came. Now they're united and fighting. That matters, even if we lose. Does it? What good is fighting if we still lose everything? The good is in the fighting itself, in refusing to give up, in showing people that resistance is possible. He kissed her temple. My father died thinking he'd failed, but we won't die thinking that. We'll know we did everything we could. That has to be enough. Evelyn turned to face him. I'm scared. Me too. But I'm also grateful. For you, for this fight, for the chance to stand for something that matters. He cupped her face gently. I love you, Evelyn. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that. The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and absolutely true. I love you too, she whispered. And I'm sorry I dragged you into this fight. You didn't drag me anywhere. I was already in it. You just showed me how to win. He kissed her then, soft and fierce. Now sleep. We've got a war to win tomorrow. They held each other in the darkness, gathering strength for the battle ahead. Outside, the city slept peacefully, unaware that in a courthouse 10 blocks away, a judge would soon decide whether justice was still possible or if power would win the way it always had before. Morning came too quickly. They dressed in their best clothes, Caleb in a suit that had belonged to his father, Evelyn in the one good dress she'd brought from Boston. In the mirror, they looked like respectable frontier people, solid and honest. They looked like people worth fighting for. Robert Chen met them at the courthouse steps. Everyone ready? As ready as we'll ever be, Evelyn said. Good. Because Hale's here and he brought 3 lawyers. Chen gestured toward the courthouse where a crowd was gathering. He's making a show of this. Wants everyone to see what happens when people challenge him. Evelyn looked at the crowd and saw Victor Hale for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 50, well-dressed and confident. He stood surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits, talking and laughing like this was a social event instead of a trial. He saw her looking and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Let's go," Chen said. "Time to show them what we've got." They walked into the courthouse together, Evelyn, Caleb, Bridger, Richardson, and all the others who'd risked everything to be here. The gallery was packed with people, some supporting Hale, others just curious about the spectacle. The judge entered and everyone stood. Judge Harold Morrison, 60 years old with a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. "Be seated," he said. "Let's begin." And with those words, the real fight finally started. Chen stood first, his voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. "Your Honor, we're here today because my clients face imminent foreclosure on loans that were obtained through fraud, manipulated through document forgery, and are now being called early and direct retaliation for their cooperation with federal investigators." One of Hale's lawyers, a silver-haired man who looked like he charged more per hour than most ranchers made in a month, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, Lawrence Hastings representing Mr. Victor Hale. These allegations are entirely baseless. My client has conducted legitimate business in this territory for over 15 years. The debts in question are real, documented, and long overdue. This is nothing more than an attempt by failed ranchers to avoid their obligations through sensational accusations." Judge Morrison held up a hand. "I'll hear arguments from both sides, then make my determination. Mr. Chen, you filed the emergency injunction. You go first." Chen approached the bench with a file folder thick enough to be a weapon. "Your Honor, the evidence is extensive, but the pattern is simple. Mr. Hale has systematically defrauded multiple ranching families through a three-part scheme. First, he consolidates their existing debts under terms that appear favorable but contain hidden clauses that make the debt impossible to eliminate. Second, he manipulates payment applications to ensure that principal is never reduced, only interest paid. Third, and most damningly, he creates false operational loans by taking borrowers' own deposited funds and re-lending them at interest." "That's a serious accusation, Counselor." Morrison's expression was unreadable. "You have proof?" "Extensive proof, Your Honor. May I approach?" Morrison nodded. Chen brought forward the evidence, organized into clear sections. Evelyn watched the judge's face as he reviewed the first few pages, looking for any sign of how he was receiving it. Nothing. The man could play poker professionally. Hastings didn't wait to be invited. He approached the bench with his own folder. "Your Honor, what Mr. Chen characterizes as fraud is simply complex financial structuring. My client's contracts were reviewed by accountants and lawyers. They're entirely legal. The fact that these ranchers failed to understand the terms they signed doesn't constitute fraud." "The contracts were altered after signing," Chen cut in. "We have original documents that differ substantially from the versions used in foreclosure proceedings." That got a reaction. Morrison looked up sharply. "You're alleging forgery?" "I'm alleging document manipulation to the point of criminal fraud, yes." Chen pulled out Richardson's original contract and the court version side by side. "This is Exhibit A, James Richardson's original loan agreement with Mr. Hale. And this is the version presented to the court when Mr. Hale foreclosed on his ranch. Note the differences in interest rates, repayment schedules, and several entire clauses that exist in one but not the other." Morrison studied both documents carefully. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Caleb's tension beside her. Finally, Morrison spoke. "Mr. Hastings, how do you explain these discrepancies?" Hastings barely glanced at the documents. "Contract amendments are common in financial restructuring, Your Honor. When borrowers request modifications to their terms—" "Mr. Richardson never requested modifications," Chen interrupted. "He'll testify under oath that the only contract he signed is this original. The altered version was presented to the court without his knowledge or consent." "That's his claim now, conveniently years after the fact." Hastings' voice dripped condescension. "Your Honor, Mr. Richardson lost his ranch through his own financial mismanagement. Now he's attempting to rewrite history to avoid responsibility." Morrison held up the documents. "These are substantially different contracts, Counselor. If what Mr. Chen says is true, if this version was never signed by Mr. Richardson, that's not creative restructuring, that's forgery." We dispute that characterization entirely. Hastings' confidence never wavered. And I'd remind the court that Mr. Richardson had ample opportunity to challenge these terms during the original foreclosure proceedings. He didn't. Now, years later, he conveniently produces a different contract? Your Honor, this smells like desperation, not fraud. Chen was ready. Mr. Richardson didn't challenge the terms because he was told by multiple lawyers that fighting Mr. Hale was futile, that the legal costs would destroy him faster than the foreclosure. And he was right. Mr. Hale's resources are vast. But that doesn't make the fraud any less real. Morrison leaned back, thinking, Mr. Chen, even if I accept that this specific contract was altered, that's one case. You're asking me to state collection actions across multiple properties based on a pattern. Where's the pattern? Right here, Your Honor. Chen brought forward 6 more sets of documents. Thomas Bridger, Elizabeth Tanner, Martin Cross, Caleb Grayson. Each one shows the same discrepancies between original agreements and court documents. Each one shows the same manipulation of payment applications. Each one shows the same pattern of deposited funds being relent as new obligations. He spread the evidence across the judge's bench like cards in a poker hand. Morrison examined each set, his expression growing darker. Evelyn watched Hale's face during this. The man showed no concern, no worry. He sat there with the calm assurance of someone who'd bought his way out of trouble before and expected to do so again. That confidence terrified her more than anger would have. Morrison finally looked up. Mr. Hastings, this is concerning. Multiple contracts showing similar alterations, multiple instances of questionable financial practices. Your client needs to explain this. My client conducts hundreds of transactions across this territory, Your Honor. Complex financial dealings that simple ranchers often misunderstand. Hastings' voice was smooth, practiced. Mr. Chen is cherry-picking instances where borrowers claim confusion while ignoring the hundreds of successful, satisfied clients Mr. Hale has served. Satisfied clients don't generally end up in foreclosure, Morrison noted dryly. Some do, unfortunately, when they overextend themselves or mismanage their resources. Hastings gestured dismissively at Evelyn and Caleb. Take the Graysons, for example. They borrowed extensively, used operational credit irresponsibly, and are now attempting to avoid their obligations through these theatrical accusations. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. Evelyn put a hand on his arm, keeping him still. Getting emotional now would only hurt their case. Chen stepped forward again. Your Honor, may I present testimony from the plaintiffs? I believe hearing directly from the affected families will clarify the pattern of abuse. Morrison checked his watch. It's nearly noon. We'll break for lunch and reconvene at 2 o'clock. Mr. Chen, you can present your witnesses then. Mr. Hastings, you'll have opportunity to cross-examine. The judge's gavel came down. Everyone stood as Morrison left the courtroom. The moment he was gone, the gallery erupted in conversation. Hale's lawyers clustered around him, talking in low, urgent voices. Hale himself finally looked less confident, his jaw tight as he listened to whatever Hastings was telling him. Chen gathered his papers quickly. That went better than I expected. Morrison's taking this seriously. He looked angry, Evelyn observed. He was. Judges hate document manipulation. It makes them look incompetent for not catching it the first time. Chen smiled grimly. But we're not done yet. Hastings will come out swinging this afternoon, trying to discredit our witnesses. Everyone needs to be ready. They filed out of the courtroom into the corridor where other ranching families waited. Elizabeth Tanner grabbed Evelyn's arm. How did it go? I couldn't tell from watching. Better than expected. Worse than hoped. Evelyn squeezed her hand. The judge is taking it seriously, but Hale's lawyers are good. This afternoon's testimony will decide everything. I'm testifying? Elizabeth looked pale. If you're willing, Chen thinks your story about your husband will resonate with Morrison. Evelyn met her eyes. But only if you can do it. Only if you're ready. Elizabeth took a shaky breath. My husband died fighting this man. The least I can do is tell the truth about it. They found a small restaurant 2 blocks from the courthouse. Chen briefed his witnesses over sandwiches nobody had appetite for, going over questions, preparing them for cross-examination, making sure everyone understood what to expect. Hastings will try to make you angry, he explained. He'll imply you're lying, suggest you're incompetent, question your memory of events. Don't take the bait. Stay calm, stick to facts, and remember, the judge is listening for truth, not drama. Jim Richardson looked sick. What if I forget something? What if I get the dates wrong? Then you say you don't remember the exact date, but you remember what happened. Honest uncertainty is better than fake precision. Chen's voice was patient. The truth doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. Across the restaurant, Evelyn spotted Hale entering with his legal team. He saw her at the same moment. For several seconds, they stared at each other across the crowded room. The man who'd built an empire on theft, and the woman trying to tear it down. Hale smiled. Then he raised his coffee cup in a mocking toast. Evelyn didn't look away, didn't show fear. She met his eyes until he finally turned back to his lawyers. "He's trying to intimidate you," Caleb said quietly. "I know. It's not working." But her hands shook slightly as she picked up her water glass. "He knows we're a threat now. That's good." "Is it? Threatened men do desperate things. So do desperate women." Evelyn forced herself to eat a few bites of sandwich. "We're all desperate here. Question is, who's desperate enough to win?" At 2 o'clock, they reconvened. The courtroom was even more packed than before, word having spread that this was more than routine foreclosure proceedings. People crowded in to watch the spectacle of small ranchers taking on Victor Hale. Morrison took his seat and got straight to business. "Mr. Chen, call your first witness." The defense calls James Richardson. Richardson walked to the witness stand like a man heading to his own execution. His hands trembled as he swore to tell the truth. Chen approached gently, his voice calm and encouraging. "Mr. Richardson, how long did you own your ranch in Red Hollow?" 12 years. Inherited it from my father." "And when did you first do business with Victor Hale?" 1878. I needed capital to expand the operation, and my regular bank wouldn't extend more credit." Richardson's voice steadied as he focused on the facts. "Hale approached me, said he could help." "What were the terms of the loan?" $8,000 at 6% interest, to be repaid over 10 years. Richardson looked at the original contract Chen handed him. "This is what I signed." "And is that the contract that was presented to the court when Mr. Hale foreclosed on your property?" "No, sir. The court version had different terms. 9% interest, shorter repayment period, and clauses I never agreed to." Chen let that hang in the air before continuing. "What happened after you signed the original contract?" "First year was fine. I made my payments. Everything seemed normal. Second year, the numbers stopped making sense. I'd pay what I owed, but the balance kept growing." "Did you question this?" "Multiple times. Hale's people said I was misreading the statements, that the complex interest calculations were confusing me." Richardson's voice cracked slightly. "Said I should trust their accounting." "Did you?" "I tried, but eventually I couldn't make the payments they claimed I owed. That's when they foreclosed." Chen nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson. No further questions." Hastings rose like a shark sensing blood. "Mr. Richardson, you said you inherited your ranch from your father. Did you have any formal training in ranch management?" "No, sir. I learned by doing." "By doing, I see." Hastings' tone made it sound like an admission of incompetence. "And financial management? Any training there?" "No." "So when you signed a complex financial contract, you didn't fully understand the terms?" Richardson's jaw tightened. "I understood the terms I signed. What I didn't understand was how they changed afterward. Or perhaps you simply failed to read the contract carefully, failed to ask questions about clauses you didn't understand." Hastings picked up the court version of the contract. "This document has your signature on it, does it not?" "That's my signature, but that's not the contract I signed." Convenient that you remember that now, years after the fact, when you stand to benefit from these accusations. Hastings' voice dripped skepticism. "Tell me, Mr. Richardson, did you hire your own lawyer to review the contract before signing?" "I couldn't afford one." "Couldn't afford a lawyer, but could afford an $8,000 loan?" Hastings shook his head. "That seems like poor financial judgment." Chen stood. "Objection. Counselor is badgering the witness. I'm establishing that this witness made poor financial decisions and is now attempting to blame others for the consequences." Hastings shot back. Morrison considered. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Richardson." Richardson took a breath. "I made the best decisions I could with the information I had. What I didn't know was that Hale would change the contract after I signed it. You keep saying that, but you have no proof beyond your own failing memory and this mysteriously preserved original contract." Hastings' voice went hard. How do we know you didn't create that document recently to support these allegations? Because I kept everything. Every paper that came through my ranch, I filed away. Richardson's voice rose slightly. My father taught me that. Said the only way to protect yourself from powerful men was to keep records. How fortunate that those records support your current claims. They support the truth. Or they support a convenient fiction designed to help you avoid responsibility for your failures. Hastings turned away dismissively. No further questions. Richardson left the stand shaking with anger and humiliation. Evelyn watched Hastings return to his seat, satisfied with himself, and felt her own anger burn hotter. Chen called Thomas Bridger next. Bridger's testimony followed a similar pattern. Clean opening statement, brutal cross-examination, designed to make him look stupid or dishonest. Hastings was good at his job, Evelyn had to admit. He made reasonable men look incompetent, made honest confusion look like lies. Elizabeth Tanner was Chen's third witness. She walked to the stand with her head high, wearing a black dress that made her look even more severe. Mrs. Tanner, please tell the court about your husband, Chen began gently. Robert Tanner. We were married 32 years. He built our ranch from nothing, worked himself to exhaustion to make it successful. Her voice was steady, controlled. Then Victor Hale offered to help him expand. 3 years later, my husband was dead, and I'd lost everything. How did your husband die? Heart attack, brought on by stress, according to the doctor. Elizabeth's hands clutched the rail in front of her. Stress from trying to understand why his ranch was failing despite doing everything right. Stress from watching Hale's debt swallow everything we'd built. Stress from feeling like a failure when the failure wasn't his. Chen let the weight of that testimony sit for a moment. Did your husband ever suspect fraud? He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't prove it, and every lawyer he talked to said fighting Hale was suicide. Her voice hardened. So he kept trying to work harder, pay more, fix whatever he thought he'd done wrong. It killed him. Thank you, Mrs. Tanner. I'm sorry for your loss. Hastings approached carefully this time, perhaps sensing that attacking a widow would play poorly. Mrs. Tanner, you have my condolences for your husband's death. Heart disease is tragically common among men his age. It wasn't heart disease. It was Hale. Elizabeth's eyes were fierce. My husband's heart was fine until your client systematically destroyed everything he'd worked for. That's an emotional interpretation, but medically inaccurate. Heart attacks have many causes. I know what killed my husband, Mr. Hastings, and it's sitting right there. She pointed at Hale. That man's greed and fraud murdered my Robert as surely as if he'd put a gun to his head. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Morrison banged his gavel. Order, Mrs. Tanner. Please confine yourself to factual statements. That is factual, Your Honor. My husband died from stress-induced heart failure directly caused by Mr. Hale's fraudulent business practices. Elizabeth's voice never wavered. I watched it happen day by day. That's as factual as it gets. Hastings tried several more questions, but Elizabeth Tanner was unshakable. She answered every challenge with firm dignity, never losing control, never backing down. By the time she left the stand, even Hastings looked rattled. Chen called 2 more witnesses before finally saying, "The defense calls Evelyn Grayson." Evelyn's heart hammered as she walked to the stand. She'd prepared for this, gone over Chen's questions a dozen times, but actually sitting here with everyone watching was different, terrifying. She swore to tell the truth and sat down, finding Caleb's eyes in the crowd. He nodded once. You've got this. Chen approached with a slight smile. Mrs. Grayson, how long have you lived in Red Hollow? Since November, about 3 months. And in those 3 months, what role have you played in investigating Mr. Hale's business practices? I've reviewed financial records from 7 different ranching operations, cross-referenced contracts and payment histories, and documented systematic patterns of fraud spanning over a decade. What's your background that qualified you to do this analysis? I worked for a bank in Boston for 5 years. My job was organizing loan documentation and maintaining financial records. I learned how debt instruments work, how contracts are structured, and how unscrupulous lenders hide predatory terms in complex language. And what did you find when you examined the Red Hollow contracts? Evelyn took a breath. This was it. I found that Victor Hale has been running a systematic fraud operation designed to trap ranchers in unpayable debt while legally stealing their land. He uses three primary methods. First, contracts with buried clauses that make principal reduction nearly impossible. Second, manipulation of how payments are applied to ensure only interest gets paid. Third, and most egregious, taking borrowers' deposited funds and relending them as new operational loans, then charging interest on money that was already theirs. She pulled out a chart she'd created. This diagram shows the pattern across all 7 operations. The numbers are slightly different, but the structure is identical. That's not coincidence. That's a system. Chen walked her through the evidence methodically, each type of fraud, each example, each piece of proof. Evelyn kept her voice steady and professional, presenting facts rather than emotions, letting the numbers tell the story. When Chen finished, Hastings stood. Evelyn braced herself. Mrs. Grayson, you've been in Montana territory for 3 months. Is that correct? Yes. 3 months. And in that time, you've appointed yourself an expert on frontier finance? His tone was mocking. That's quite remarkable. I didn't appoint myself anything. I simply applied knowledge I already had to documents that needed analysis. Knowledge from working as a file clerk in a Boston bank. Hastings made it sound like the lowest job imaginable. Tell me, in your extensive 3 months of experience, how many actual loan contracts did you personally draft or negotiate? None, but I processed hundreds of them, which taught me what legitimate contracts look like and how fraudulent ones are structured. Or it taught you how to create convincing forgeries. Hastings' voice went sharp. How do we know you didn't fabricate these so-called original contracts? You admit you have experience with financial documents. Who's to say you didn't create false evidence to support your husband's attempt to avoid his debts? That's absurd, is it? You arrived in Red Hollow under somewhat mysterious circumstances. A mail-order bride from back east. Within weeks, you're making serious accusations against one of the territory's most respected businessmen. Hastings paced in front of her. Seems convenient, almost like you came here specifically to run this scheme. Chen shot to his feet. Objection! Counselor is engaging in wild speculation with no factual basis. I'm establishing that this witness has questionable credibility and possible ulterior motives, Hastings countered. Morrison looked annoyed. Mr. Hastings, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you stick to questioning the witness about her testimony. Very well, Your Honor. Hastings turned back to Evelyn. Mrs. Grayson, isn't it true that your husband is facing foreclosure and stands to lose everything? Yes. So you have a strong personal incentive to derail that foreclosure through any means necessary? I have a strong personal incentive to stop fraud, yes. That doesn't make the fraud any less real. Or it makes you willing to say anything, claim anything, fabricate anything to save your husband's failing ranch. Hastings leaned closer. Tell me, what did your husband promise you if you helped him avoid his debts? A share of the ranch? Financial security? He promised me nothing except partnership in fighting injustice. Evelyn's voice stayed level despite her anger. I'm doing this because Victor Hale is a criminal who's destroyed families for profit. The fact that my family is one of them doesn't make me biased. It makes me informed. Informed? Or desperate? Hastings smiled coldly. I think the court can decide which. The cross-examination continued for another 30 minutes, Hastings trying every angle to discredit her. But Evelyn had spent years dealing with condescending men who thought women couldn't understand finance. She answered every question with calm precision, never losing her temper, never giving him the emotional outburst he was clearly hoping for. When she finally left the stand, her legs were shaking but her head was high. Chen rested his case. Hastings called character witnesses for Hale, businessmen who testified to his reputation, clients who claimed satisfaction with their dealings. All carefully selected, all clearly coached. When the testimony finally ended, Morrison called both lawyers to the bench. Gentlemen, I've heard enough. I'll need time to review the evidence thoroughly before making a determination. Court is adjourned until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, at which time I'll deliver my ruling on the emergency injunction. His gavel came down with finality. Everyone stood as Morrison left. The moment he was gone, Hale pushed through the crowd toward Evelyn and Caleb. His lawyers tried to stop him, but he shook them off. He stopped 3 feet away, his face rigid with barely controlled fury. You've made a very serious mistake, he said quietly. Both of you. The only mistake was thinking you'd get away with this forever, Evelyn replied. I've been getting away with it for 15 years. You think one judge in one hearing is going to change that? Hale's smile was vicious. Even if Morrison rules in your favor, which he won't, I have appeals. I have connections. I have resources you can't begin to imagine. I will bury you so deep you'll forget what daylight looks like. We'll see about that. Caleb's voice was hard. Yes, we will. Hale looked at Evelyn with something like curiosity. I underestimated you. I thought you were just another desperate woman looking for a meal ticket. I was wrong. You're actually dangerous. Is that supposed to scare me? It's supposed to warn you. Dangerous people don't last long in my territory. He leaned closer. Accidents happen, Mrs. Grayson. Houses burn. People disappear. Winter in Montana is very unforgiving. Is that a threat? Chen appeared at Evelyn's shoulder. Because making threats against a witness is a crime, Mr. Hale, and we have plenty of witnesses who just heard you do exactly that. Hale straightened, his expression smoothing back into polite neutrality. No threat, counselor. Simply stating facts about frontier life. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to these good people. He turned and walked away, his lawyers falling in behind him like an expensive shield. He just threatened us in open court, Caleb said, stunned. He doesn't care. That's how confident he is that consequences don't apply to him. Chen watched Hale leave, but that confidence might be his weakness. Overconfident men make mistakes. That night they stayed in the same hotel, too exhausted to make the trip back to Red Hollow. Evelyn sat by the window staring at the dark street below, replaying every moment of the hearing in her mind. You did good today, Caleb said from the bed. Really good. We won't know if it was good enough until tomorrow. Even if Morrison rules against us, you did good. You stood up to Hale and Hastings and didn't back down. That takes courage. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold glass. I'm not brave, Caleb. I'm just too stubborn to quit. Same thing sometimes? He came to stand beside her. What are you thinking about? Hale's threat. He meant it. Win or lose tomorrow, he's going to come after us. Let him try. We're not alone anymore. We've got witnesses. We've got Chen. We've got federal investigators looking into this. Hale can't make all of us disappear. Can't he? He's been doing it for 15 years. She turned to look at him. People who opposed him lost everything. Some left the territory. Some died. We're playing a very dangerous game. I know. Caleb pulled her close. But what's the alternative? Roll over and let him take everything without a fight? That's not living. That's just slowly dying. They held each other in the darkness, drawing strength from shared determination. Outside, the city slept. Somewhere in an expensive hotel room, Victor Hale was probably sleeping soundly, confident that money and power would win the way they always had. Maybe he was right. Maybe Morrison would rule against them. Maybe all this fighting would end in failure and loss. But at least they'd fought. At least they'd stood. At least they'd shown that resistance was possible, even against overwhelming odds. That had to mean something. It had to. Morning came gray and cold. They dressed in silence, the weight of the coming verdict pressing down on everyone. At the courthouse, they found the other ranching families already gathered: Bridger, Tanner, Richardson, Cross, all of them looking as sleepless and anxious as Evelyn felt. Whatever happens, Bridger said quietly, I want you to know this was worth it. Standing up, fighting back. Even if we lose, it was worth it. The others nodded agreement. Elizabeth Tanner squeezed Evelyn's hand. You gave us hope. That's worth more than you know. At 9 o'clock sharp, Morrison entered the courtroom. Everyone stood, then sat at his gesture. The judge looked tired, like he'd been up all night reviewing evidence. I've considered the arguments and evidence presented by both sides, he began without preamble. This court takes allegations of fraud and document manipulation very seriously. If proven, such actions represent a fundamental corruption of the legal system that cannot be tolerated. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear. That said, Morrison continued, the evidence presented, while concerning, requires thorough investigation to determine its validity. The altered contracts could be the result of fraud, as Mr. Chen suggests, or legitimate amendments, as Mr. Hastings claims. The financial irregularities could be systematic theft or complex accounting that the plaintiffs simply don't understand. No, he was going to rule against them. Evelyn could hear it in his tone. However, Morrison said, and Evelyn's breath caught, the sheer volume of similar complaints, The pattern of document discrepancies and the testimony of multiple witnesses raises substantial questions that merit further examination. Additionally, the timing of Mr. Hale's loan calls, immediately following the filing of federal complaints, suggests possible retaliatory intent. He looked directly at Hale. Therefore, I am granting the emergency injunction. All collection actions against the plaintiffs are stayed for 90 days pending a full investigation by federal authorities. During that time, Mr. Hale is prohibited from calling loans, initiating foreclosure proceedings, or taking any actions that could be construed as retaliation against witnesses. The courtroom erupted. Evelyn felt Caleb grab her hand, heard Chen's quiet yes of victory, saw Hale's face go dark with fury. Morrison banged his gavel. Order, I'm not finished. The room quieted. This is not a finding of guilt. This is simply a stay to allow proper investigation. Mr. Hale, you have 90 days to provide documentation supporting your version of events. Mr. Chen, your clients have 90 days to provide additional evidence supporting their fraud allegations. At the end of that period, we'll reconvene and I'll make a final determination. Another bang of the gavel. Court is adjourned. They stood as Morrison left, and then suddenly everyone was talking at once, lawyers conferring, witnesses celebrating or commiserating depending on which side they were on. Chen grabbed Evelyn and Caleb. 90 days. That's enough time for the Department of the Interior to complete their investigation. If they find what I think they'll find, Hale goes to prison, Caleb finished. Maybe, if we can keep him from destroying evidence or intimidating more witnesses in the meantime. Chen's expression was serious. This isn't over. This is just the beginning of the real fight. Hale will do everything he can to make sure that investigation never happens or finds nothing. Then we make sure it does happen and finds everything. Evelyn felt fierce determination flood through her. We've got 90 days. Let's make them count. They left the courthouse together, stepping out into cold morning air that felt somehow cleaner, lighter. The ranching families gathered on the steps, uncertain what to do now that they'd actually won something. We go home, Bridger said finally. We keep working our ranches, we keep records of everything, and we wait to see if justice is actually possible. It is, Evelyn said firmly. We proved that today. Not completely, not finally, but enough to matter. Enough to keep fighting. They dispersed slowly, heading back to their lives and ranches, carrying with them the fragile, dangerous thing called hope. Evelyn and Caleb rode home through snow that had started falling again. Neither spoke for the first few miles, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. We actually did it. We beat him. We got to stay. That's not the same as winning. It's more than anyone else has managed in 15 years. He looked at her. You did that. You organized the evidence, found the patterns, gave people courage to stand. This victory is yours. It's ours. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Evelyn leaned against him as the wagon rolled through the frozen landscape. 90 days, Caleb. Anything could happen in 90 days. Then we make sure what happens is Hale's complete destruction. His voice was hard with determination. No mercy. No half measures. We end this. Together, she agreed. Together. The ranch appeared ahead, familiar and solid against the winter sky. Home. They'd fought for it and won the right to keep fighting for it. That was something. That was everything. As they pulled into the yard, Evelyn saw smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was inside. Her hand moved to the rifle, but then the door opened and Thomas Bridger stepped out, grinning. Figured you'd want a warm house to come home to. Got the fire going, made some coffee. He took in their expressions. You won? 90-day stay, federal investigation. Hale can't touch any of us during that time. Caleb helped Evelyn down from the wagon. Morrison took it seriously. Hot damn. Bridger's grin widened. That's the best news I've heard in 5 years. Come on inside. Tell me everything. They went in together, and for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. Safety. Not complete, not permanent, but real enough to matter. They'd fought an empire and survived the first battle. The war wasn't over, but they'd proven it could be fought. That victory, however temporary, burned warm and bright against the winter cold. The celebration lasted exactly 3 days before reality reasserted itself. Evelyn was in the barn checking on a cow that had gone lame when she heard the horse approach. She grabbed the pitchfork, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing, and stepped outside to find Robert Chen dismounting in the yard. One look at his face told her this wasn't a social visit. "What happened?" she asked. "Federal investigator arrived in Helena yesterday. Name's David Porter, Department of the Interior." Chen tied his horse to the post. "I met with him this morning. He's reviewed the preliminary evidence." And he's good, sharp, thorough, doesn't seem susceptible to intimidation. Chen paused. "But he's also cautious. He wants to interview every witness personally, review every document in detail, and build an airtight case before taking action. He estimates it'll take 6 weeks minimum." Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the February wind. "We have 90 days total. If he takes 6 weeks just for investigation, then we have very little margin for error." Chen followed her into the house where Caleb was reviewing ranch accounts. "There's more. Hale filed an appeal of Morrison's injunction yesterday. He's arguing that the stay prevents him from conducting legitimate business and requesting it be lifted pending the investigation." Caleb looked up sharply. "Can he do that?" "He can file anything he wants. Whether a higher court will hear it is another question." Chen accepted the coffee Evelyn poured. "Morrison's order is solid, but Hale has connections on the Territorial Supreme Court. If he gets the right judge, the stay gets overturned and we're back where we started." Evelyn sat down heavily. "We can't let that happen." "We won't. I'm filing counter motions arguing that any modification of the stay would constitute witness intimidation and obstruction of a federal investigation." Chen pulled papers from his bag. "But I need more ammunition. Porter wants additional evidence beyond what we already provided. Specifically, he wants to trace Hale's financial network, where the money goes, who else is involved, whether this extends beyond Red Hollow." "That could take months," Caleb said, "which is why Porter's bringing in a forensic accountant from Washington, someone who specializes in fraud investigations." Chen looked at Evelyn. "He asked specifically if you'd be willing to work with her, share your analysis, help map the financial patterns." Evelyn's mind was already racing ahead. "When does she arrive?" "End of the week. Her name's Margaret Shaw. Porter says she's the best in the department at unraveling complex fraud schemes." Chen smiled slightly. He seemed impressed that you'd done as much documentation as you did with no formal training. "I had plenty of informal training. Watching my father get destroyed taught me exactly what to look for." Evelyn stood and started pacing. "If we're tracing Hale's network, we need to look at his other businesses. He doesn't just do ranch consolidations. What else does he own? Mining claims, timber rights, commercial properties in 3 different towns." Caleb had been quietly gathering intelligence over the past weeks. "He owns the bank in Red Hollow and has controlling interest in 2 others. Plus he's on the board of the Territorial Development Commission. So he's not just stealing from ranchers. He's positioned himself at every major financial choke point in the territory." Evelyn felt pieces clicking together. "That's how he's maintained control for so long. He doesn't just have money. He controls the flow of money." Chen nodded slowly. "If we can prove he's used that control to manipulate multiple industries, not just ranching, this becomes bigger than local fraud. It becomes territorial corruption at a systemic level, which brings in more federal authority," Evelyn finished. "Porter won't just be investigating one man's business practices. He'll be investigating whether Hale's essentially created a criminal enterprise that's corrupted territorial governance." "Exactly." Chen gathered his papers. "I need to get back to Helena and coordinate with Porter. Mrs. Grayson, when Shaw arrives, show her everything, hold nothing back. And both of you, watch your backs. Hale knows he's in trouble. Cornered men do desperate things." After Chen left, Evelyn and Caleb sat in heavy silence. The scope of what they were attempting was becoming clear, and it was terrifying. "We're not just fighting one fraud case anymore," Caleb said quietly. "We're trying to dismantle an entire power structure." "I know." Evelyn stared at the papers spread across the table. "And Hale knows it too. That threat he made at the courthouse, he meant it. The bigger this gets, the more dangerous we become to him." "You want to back out?" She looked at him, this man who'd become her partner in every sense that mattered. "Do you?" "No. But I want you safe. If something happened to you because of this fight, then something happens. We've been over this." Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm not backing out. I'm not running. We finished this. That night they made plans. If they were going to trace Hale's full network, they needed information from sources beyond Red Hollow. Evelyn drafted letters to courthouses in 3 counties, requesting records of Hale's business filings and property transfers. Caleb reached out to ranchers and miners in other districts, asking discreet questions about their dealings with Hale. The responses that trickled back over the next week painted a damning picture. Hale's pattern of fraud extended far beyond ranching. Miners who'd lost claims to mysterious debt increases. Timber operators whose contracts had been altered. Small business owners forced out by unexplained financial pressures. All following the same playbook Evelyn had documented in Red Hollow. When Margaret Shaw arrived on February 28th, Evelyn handed her a file 3 inches thick. Shaw was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the intense focus of someone who thought in numbers the way most people thought in words. She spent 2 days reviewing Evelyn's documentation without speaking much. On the 3rd day, she looked up from the papers spread across the Grayson kitchen table and said, "This is the most comprehensive fraud analysis I've seen from someone without formal training. How did you learn to map financial networks like this?" Trial and error, and anger. Evelyn poured more coffee. Anger's a good teacher. It is. Shaw pulled out her own notebooks, covered in complex equations and flowcharts. "I've been tracking Hale's money movements through 3 territorial banks. The pattern you identified in the ranching operations appears in at least 4 other industries. But here's what you missed, and I only caught it because I have access to federal banking records." She drew a diagram showing money flowing between accounts. Hale doesn't keep the profits. He's moving them through a series of holding companies registered in 3 different territories. The money goes in as loan repayments, gets laundered through these shells, and comes out as investment capital that he uses to buy more assets. So he's not just stealing from individuals. He's building an empire with stolen money. Evelyn studied the diagram. "Can we prove the connection between the original fraud and the shell companies?" "If we can get the accounting records from those companies, yes, but they're not in Montana territory, which means we need cooperation from other jurisdictions." Shaw looked at her seriously. "This is going to get complicated. And political. Hale has friends in high places. Then we make friends in higher places." Evelyn's voice was firm. "Porter has federal authority. That supersedes territorial politics, doesn't it? In theory, in practice, federal investigators can be pressured too." Shaw closed her notebook. "I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to make sure you understand what we're up against. Men like Hale don't build empires without protecting them. He's got lawyers, politicians, judges, people who benefit from his success and will fight to protect it." "Let them fight. We've got the truth." Evelyn met her eyes. "That has to count for something." Shaw smiled slightly. "You sound like Porter. He said you'd be stubborn. He meant it as a compliment, I hope." "He did." Shaw gathered her papers. "All right. Here's what we need. Complete accounting records from every bank Hale controls or has influence over. Property transfer documents for every acquisition he's made in the last 10 years. And testimony from anyone in his organization willing to talk about how the fraud actually operates." "That last one's going to be hard," Caleb said from where he'd been listening. "People who work for Hale are either complicit or terrified. Probably both. Usually, but sometimes there's someone with a conscience or a grudge who's waiting for the right moment to speak up." Shaw looked at them both. "Your job is to find that person. Mine is to build a case so strong that when they do speak up, their testimony can't be ignored or discredited." Over the next 3 weeks, Evelyn and Caleb became investigators. They traveled to neighboring counties, talking to anyone who'd done business with Hale. Most were too frightened to say much. Some slammed doors in their faces. A few, very few, whispered stories that added pieces to the puzzle. An accountant in Helena who'd worked for Hale briefly before quitting in disgust. A lawyer who'd been fired for questioning contract alterations. A bank clerk who'd seen documents shredded and been told to forget what she'd witnessed. None of them would testify. All of them were terrified. But each conversation added details that helped Shaw map Hale's operation. By mid-March, they had enough evidence to shock even Porter. The federal investigator reviewed Shaw's findings with an expression that grew darker by the page. "This isn't just fraud," he said finally. "This is organized crime. Hale's running what amounts to a protection racket disguised as legitimate business. He controls the banks, manipulates the courts, and systematically loots anyone who can't fight back. Can you stop him? Evelyn asked. I can build a case that'll put him in federal prison for 20 years, but I need witnesses willing to testify. Real witnesses, not just documents. Porter looked at her seriously. The people you've talked to, the accountant, the lawyer, the clerk, I need them on record. Can you get them to come forward? They're terrified. Hale's destroyed everyone who's opposed him. Then we offer them protection. Federal protection, witness relocation if necessary. Whatever it takes. Porter's voice was hard. But I need living, breathing witnesses standing in front of a judge saying, I saw Victor Hale commit fraud. Documents aren't enough. Not for something this big. Evelyn spent the next week making those impossible asks. She rode back to Helena and sat across from the accountant in a small cafe, explaining what was at stake. If I testify, I'm finished in this territory, the man said, hands shaking around his coffee cup. Hale will make sure I never work again. If you don't testify, he keeps destroying people. How many families have to lose everything before someone stands up? Evelyn kept her voice gentle but firm. You quit because you saw what he was doing. You knew it was wrong. Now you have a chance to actually stop it. At what cost? Maybe your career here, maybe your safety for a while. She leaned forward. But Porter's offering federal protection. And if this works, if we actually beat Hale, you'll be the man who helped bring down the most corrupt operation in Montana Territory. That's worth something. He stared at his coffee for a long time. I need to think about it. You have until April 1st. That's when the 90-day stay expires. Evelyn stood to leave. After that, Hale goes back to business as usual, and everyone who stood against him pays the price, including you, whether you testified or not. He knows you talked to us. She left him with that thought and went to have similar conversations with the lawyer and the bank clerk. Same fear, same hesitation, same terrible calculation of risk versus responsibility. By the time she returned to Red Hollow, she was exhausted and discouraged. She'd gotten maybes and I'll think about it's, but no firm commitments. Caleb met her at the door with news that didn't help. Hale's appeal got approved. There's a hearing scheduled for April 10th to review Morrison's injunction. His face was grim. If the appellate court overturns the stay, everything we've built falls apart. Then we make sure they don't overturn it. Evelyn set down her bags. Chen's arguing the case? Yeah, but he's worried. The judge assigned to hear it is Thomas Whitmore. Whitmore's ruled in Hale's favor on 3 previous cases. Caleb pulled her close. We're running out of time and running out of allies. We've still got each other, and we've got the truth. Evelyn buried her face against his shoulder, letting herself have one moment of weakness. That has to be enough. What if it's not? Then we lose. But we'll lose knowing we fought as hard as we could. She pulled back to look at him. I'm tired, Caleb. I'm scared and exhausted and starting to wonder if this is even possible. But I can't quit. I don't know how. Then we don't quit. We keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight with. He kissed her forehead. Together, like we promised. The last week of March brought unexpected help from an unexpected source. A telegram arrived from Helena, sent by Chen. Accountant agreed to testify. Lawyer still hesitant. Bank clerk disappeared. Unknown if fled or silenced. Proceed with caution. One witness. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then 2 days later, Jim Richardson showed up at the ranch with a stranger, a man in his 50s who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. This is Peter Grant, Richardson said. He worked as Hale's bookkeeper for 8 years. He wants to talk. Evelyn invited them in, her heart pounding. A bookkeeper. Someone who'd seen Hale's operation from the inside. This could be the breakthrough they needed. Grant sat at the kitchen table wringing his hands. I helped him do it. All of it. The contract alterations, the false loan entries, the payment manipulations. I kept the real books and the fake ones. I knew what he was doing was wrong, but I was too much of a coward to stop it. What changed? Evelyn asked. My daughter, she's 18 now, about to get married. Her fiancé's family owns a small ranch near Billings. Grant's voice cracked. Last week, Hale mentioned he was looking at expanding operations that direction. Talked about some promising properties that could be acquired if the owners ran into financial difficulties. He looked up, tears in his eyes. I realized he was planning to do to them what we did to everyone else. Planning to destroy my daughter's future the same way I helped destroy so many others. And I can't. He broke down completely. Evelyn gave him time to collect himself. "I'll testify," Grant said finally. "I'll give you everything. The real accounting books, the altered contracts, documentation of every fraudulent transaction over 8 years. But I need protection. Hale will kill me if he finds out." "Porter can arrange that. Federal witness protection." Evelyn was already planning. "But we need to get you and those documents to Helena safely. If Hale suspects—" "He already suspects." "I took the documents 2 days ago. He knows they're missing." Grant pulled a leather satchel from under his coat. "This is everything. 8 years of systematic fraud, all documented." Evelyn opened the satchel and felt her breath catch. Ledgers, contracts, correspondence, proof of everything they'd suspected, and more. "We need to leave for Helena tonight," Caleb said. "Get Grant and these documents to Porter before Hale figures out where he is." They made the trip under cover of darkness, Grant hidden in the back of the wagon under blankets. Every shadow looked like potential danger, every sound like riders approaching. But they made it to Helena by dawn and delivered Grant directly to Porter's protection. The federal investigator reviewed the documents with Shaw, their expressions growing darker with each page. "This is it," Porter said finally. "This is everything we need. Grant can testify to the mechanics of the fraud. The documents prove it happened, and our other witnesses can corroborate the pattern. We have enough to bring formal charges." "When?" Evelyn asked. "I'll present to the territorial grand jury next week. If they indict, and with this evidence they will, Hale gets arrested and this whole operation shuts down." Porter looked at them seriously. "You did it. You actually built a case strong enough to take down Victor Hale." The relief Evelyn felt was so intense it was almost painful. "What about the appeal hearing? Hale's trying to overturn the stay." "Won't matter once he's indicted. Criminal charges supersede civil proceedings." Porter smiled grimly. "By the time that hearing happens, Hale will be sitting in a jail cell waiting for trial." They stayed in Helena for the grand jury presentation. Porter called Grant first, who testified for 6 hours about the internal workings of Hale's fraud operation. Then the accountant, who confirmed the contract alterations. Then Shaw, who walked the jury through the financial evidence with devastating clarity. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes and returned with indictments on 12 counts of fraud, 6 counts of forgery, and 3 counts of witness intimidation. On April 5th, federal marshals arrested Victor Hale at his office in Red Hollow. Evelyn wasn't there to see it, but Thomas Bridger was. He rode to the ranch that evening with the news grinning wider than she'd ever seen. They came at noon, 4 marshals, all armed. Hale tried to talk his way out of it, threatened them with lawyers and connections. They didn't care. Just put him in chains and hauled him off to the territorial jail. Bridger laughed, a sound of pure relief. The look on his face when he realized his power was gone, "I'll remember that until I die." The trial took place in May. Chen argued the civil fraud case while Porter prosecuted the criminal charges. Hale's expensive lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. Grant's testimony, backed by 8 years of documented fraud, left no room for doubt. The jury convicted on all counts. Judge Morrison, presiding over both the civil and criminal proceedings, looked at Hale without sympathy. "Mr. Hale, you used your position of financial power to systematically defraud and destroy hardworking families across this territory. You corrupted legal systems, intimidated witnesses, and showed no remorse for the devastation you caused. This court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison and orders full restitution to all affected parties." He banged the gavel. "Additionally, all properties and assets obtained through fraudulent means are hereby forfeit. The court-appointed administrator will review every transaction and return stolen properties to their rightful owners." In the gallery, Evelyn sat between Caleb and Elizabeth Tanner, watching justice finally arrive. It didn't erase the damage Hale had done. Elizabeth's husband was still dead. Families had still lost years to his fraud, but it was something. It was accountability. Hale was led away in chains, and for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Evelyn felt the weight she'd been carrying start to lift. The process of unwinding Hale's empire took months. Court-appointed administrators reviewed every transaction, every contract, every property transfer. Slowly, painfully, stolen ranches were returned to their owners. Fraudulent debts were canceled. Families who'd lost everything got a chance to rebuild. The Grayson Ranch was declared free and clear of all debt. The original mortgage had been paid off twice over through Caleb's inflated payments. Everything beyond that had been theft. now returned. Jim Richardson got his land back. Thomas Bridger's debt was erased. Elizabeth Tanner received compensation for her husband's ranch and enough money to live comfortably for the first time in years. Not everyone could be made whole. Some families had scattered too far to be found. Some damage was permanent. But in Red Hollow Valley, hope returned in ways both large and small. By the time summer arrived, the ranch looked different. Caleb had hired back workers he'd had to let go. The cattle herd was growing again. The house got repairs it had needed for years, and Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening in late June, standing in the kitchen where so much of their fight had been planned. He stared at her for a long moment, then picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby! We're having a baby!" He set her down carefully, like she might break. "I can't believe it. After everything, we get to have this." Evelyn touched her still flat stomach. "A future, a family. Things I never thought I'd have." That night they sat on the porch watching the sun set across the valley. The land stretched out before them, rich and green and theirs. No debt hanging over it, no threat of foreclosure. Just honest land, honestly worked. "You ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't answered that advertisement?" Caleb asked. "Sometimes. I'd probably still be in Boston working some terrible job, surviving instead of living." Evelyn leaned against him. "Coming here was the best decision I ever made, even with everything we went through. Even the death threats and legal battles, even those, because they taught me something important." She looked up at him. "I spent my whole life afraid. Afraid of loss, afraid of caring, afraid of fighting for anything because fighting meant you could lose. But you can't live like that. Being afraid of loss isn't protection, it's just another kind of death. So what did you learn? That some things are worth fighting for even when you might lose. That standing up matters even when standing up is terrifying." She touched her stomach again. "And that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite being scared out of your mind." Caleb kissed her temple. "Our kid's gonna grow up hearing the story of how their mother took down an empire with nothing but stubbornness and a head for numbers. And how their father stood beside her even when everyone said it was impossible." Evelyn smiled. "That's a good story to grow up with. Better than the one I had." Over the following months, other families approached them for help. Word had spread about what happened in Red Hollow, and people facing similar situations wanted guidance. Evelyn found herself traveling to other districts, teaching people how to read contracts, how to spot fraud, how to organize evidence and build cases. She didn't do it for money, though some families insisted on paying. She did it because she'd learned something in fighting hail. One person standing alone would always lose to entrenched power. But people standing together, armed with knowledge and refusing to quit, could move mountains. Robert Chen set up a small legal clinic in Helena, offering services to families fighting predatory lending. Margaret Shaw trained local accountants in fraud detection. Peter Grant, after serving a reduced sentence for his cooperation, became an advocate for financial transparency and territorial governance. And slowly, the culture began to shift. Practices that had been accepted as just business started being recognized as fraud. Contracts got scrutinized more carefully. People asked questions instead of signing blindly. It wasn't a revolution, it was just people learning to protect themselves. But sometimes that was enough. In February of 1883, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace because grace was something both of them had needed and somehow found in each other. Elizabeth Tanner came to help during the first difficult weeks. She held the baby while Evelyn slept, told stories about her own children, and occasionally cried while looking at this new life that got to grow up in a world slightly more just than the one her husband had died in. "Robert would have loved seeing this," she said one afternoon, rocking Grace while Evelyn rested, "seeing that his fight meant something, that it led to this." "It did mean something," Evelyn said. "Every person who stood up, every bit of evidence gathered, every moment of courage, it all mattered. Grace gets to grow up here because of what Robert and others like him were willing to fight for." "And because of what you were willing to finish," Elizabeth smiled. "You gave us all hope when we had none left. That's worth more than you know." Spring came again to Red Hollow, bringing with it the kind of new growth that felt earned rather than given. The valley that had been dying under Hale's systematic theft was alive again. Ranches that had been shuttered reopened. Families that had been scattered returned. On a warm April morning, Evelyn stood in the yard holding Grace while Caleb worked on repairing the barn. Thomas Bridger rode up with mail, including a letter from Robert Chen. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing her an official-looking envelope. Evelyn opened it and read Chen's neat handwriting. The territorial legislature had passed new laws requiring transparency in lending practices, mandatory independent review of complex contracts, and criminal penalties for document forgery. The laws were being called the Red Hollow Reforms. "They named the reforms after us," she told Caleb when he came over to see what had arrived. "After what we did." "After what you did? You're the one who organized the fight." He looked at the letter. "Our daughter's going to grow up in a territory with actual protections for people like us. That's because of you." Evelyn looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt something she'd never expected to feel: pride. Not in defeating Hale specifically, but in proving that ordinary people armed with truth and determination could challenge power and sometimes win. The fight had been brutal. The cost had been high. But sitting here on land that was truly theirs, holding a child who would grow up knowing her parents had stood for something, Evelyn understood that some struggles were worth the price. She'd come to Montana Territory as a desperate woman with a worn leather trunk and nothing to lose. She'd found partnership, purpose, and proof that courage wasn't something you were born with. It was something you chose, over and over, in moments when choosing was terrifying. That was the story she'd tell Grace someday. Not a fairy tale about heroes and villains, but an honest account of how ordinary people faced with impossible odds had refused to quit. How fear and determination could coexist. How love wasn't just romance, but the decision to stand beside someone through fights that might destroy you both. Because, in the end, that was what mattered. Not the victory itself, but the willingness to fight for things worth fighting for. The choice to stand when standing was hard. The refusal to let fear make you small. Evelyn had spent her whole life learning how to survive. In Red Hollow, she'd finally learned how to live. And that made all the difference. Years later, when people asked about those days, Evelyn would tell them the truth, that she'd been terrified most of the time, that she'd made mistakes and doubted herself and sometimes wanted to give up, that courage hadn't felt noble or heroic. It had felt like doing what needed to be done even when every instinct screamed to run. But she'd also tell them that fighting had been worth it, that standing up had changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone in the valley. That one person's refusal to accept injustice could spark changes that rippled far beyond anything they imagined. She'd tell them that power often won, but not always, and that the times it didn't win were worth fighting for. Grace grew up hearing these stories, learning that her mother wasn't perfect, but was brave when it counted, that her father had stood beside her mother through impossible odds, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they refused to quit. And when Grace was old enough to understand, Evelyn took her to the courthouse in Helena and showed her the records of the trial, the evidence that had brought down an empire, the testimonies that had changed laws, the proof that justice, however delayed, was possible. "Why are you showing me this?" Grace asked, studying the yellowed papers. "Because I want you to know what's possible," Evelyn said. "When you grow up, you'll face things that seem impossible. People will tell you to be quiet, to accept the way things are, to not make trouble. And sometimes they'll be right. Not every fight is worth fighting. How do you know which ones are? You'll know. It's the ones that keep you up at night. The ones that make you angry, not just for yourself, but for others who can't fight. The ones where doing nothing would mean betraying who you are." Evelyn touched her daughter's face gently. "When you find those fights, I want you to remember that you come from people who stood up. That courage is choosing to act despite fear, that you're stronger than you think." Grace studied the papers, then looked at her mother with eyes that held understanding beyond her years. "You were scared, weren't you, when you fought Mr. Hale? Terrified. Every single day. But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway. Because the alternative, living in fear, accepting injustice, letting bad people win without resistance, that wasn't living at all. That was just slow death." Evelyn smiled. "And I was tired of dying." They walked out of the courthouse together into Montana sunshine, carrying the past but not burdened by it. The valley spread before them, green and thriving, proof that resistance mattered and courage counted. Evelyn had come to Red Hollow with nothing but survival instincts and anger. She'd found partnership, purpose, and the strength that comes from refusing to be defeated. The ranch that had almost been stolen was now truly home. The fight that had nearly destroyed them had instead forged them into something stronger. And standing there with her daughter, looking across land that would pass to grace someday, Evelyn understood that this was the real victory. Not defeating Hale specifically, but creating a future where people like him had less power and people like her had more. Where victims became fighters, where the desperate found courage, where one person's stand could inspire others to stand too. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything. And as summer wind moved across the valley she'd fought to protect, Evelyn finally allowed herself to feel what she'd been too afraid to feel before. Not just survival, but contentment. Not just existence, but peace. She was home. Not because of where she was, but because of who she'd become and what she'd proved possible. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was refuse to accept that power always won. Sometimes courage was just stubbornness refined into action. Sometimes justice took time and fight and sacrifice, but it was still worth pursuing. And sometimes, just sometimes, the desperate woman with nothing to lose became the person who changed everything. That was the story of Red Hollow. That was Evelyn's truth. And it was enough.